My name is Paige, 33 years old, and a forensic accountant in Chicago. I texted my family on a Tuesday morning feeling sad that no one remembered my birthday. My mother replied that they needed space and were better off without me, and told me never to contact them again. My sister actually liked the message. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I blocked their numbers along with their access to the multi-million-dollar family trust they had been living off for a decade. The next morning, I woke up to 80 missed calls. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in our affluent neighborhood, I was the undisputed outcast of the Winston family. My father Thomas and my mother Catherine were obsessed with appearances. They threw lavish parties, drove expensive cars, and constantly bragged about my younger sister Brittany. Brittany was the golden child. She was loud, demanding, and perfectly willing to play the role of the spoiled heiress. I was the quiet one, the one who liked math and puzzles. My parents made it clear that my practical nature was an embarrassment to their glamorous lifestyle. On the morning of my 33rd birthday, I sat alone at my kitchen island. I had not heard from my parents or my sister in weeks. They were currently on a luxury ski trip in Aspen, Colorado. I knew this because Brittany had been posting photos online all week showing off her designer snow gear and the private chalet they had rented. I looked at my phone and felt a brief moment of vulnerability. I opened our family group chat and typed a simple message. Thinking of you guys today. I hit send, foolishly hoping that someone would realize what day it was and send a quick birthday wish. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a reply from my mother, Catherine. The message read, "We need space. We are better off without you. Do not contact us again." A second later, another notification popped up. Brittany had liked the message. The screen glared back at me. They had not just forgotten my birthday. They were actively cutting me out of their lives while spending a fortune on a vacation. 10 years ago, that message would have crushed me. I would have begged for their love. I remembered when I was 18 years old, and my father threw my college scholarship applications into the fireplace. He told me they needed the money to buy Brittany a sports car for her birthday, calling me a leech for even asking for help with tuition. I had to take out massive student loans and work night shifts just to get my accounting degree. They always viewed me as a financial burden, completely blind to their own massive hypocrisy. But today, I was not that helpless 18-year-old girl. I am a forensic accountant. I track missing money for corporate clients. I uncover hidden assets and expose financial fraud. And I had a secret that my family had no idea about. I stood up from my kitchen stool and walked into my home office. I unlocked the heavy metal filing cabinet in the corner and pulled out a thick leather binder. Inside were the original documents for the Winston Family Trust. My grandfather, a brilliant and ruthless businessman, had seen exactly what my parents were doing. He knew their reckless spending would bankrupt the family. Before he passed away, he restructured his entire estate. He made my parents temporary beneficiaries, giving them an allowance to live on. But he added an ironclad stipulation. The moment his eldest granddaughter turned exactly 33 years old, that temporary status would evaporate. I would automatically become the sole trustee, gaining absolute control over every single bank account, investment portfolio, and real estate asset. My parents thought they had buried this document. They thought a quiet accountant would never dig into the legal complexities of offshore accounts and trust law. They were wrong. I carried the binder back to the kitchen and opened my laptop. I logged into the private wealth management portal using the administrative credentials I had legally secured months ago in preparation for this exact day. The dashboard loaded, displaying a staggering balance of over $40 million. Below that number was a live feed of their recent transactions: $800 for a steak dinner in Aspen, $3,000 at a luxury boutique for Brittany. They were spending money that technically no longer belonged to them. They wanted space. They wanted me to never contact them again. I decided to give them the ultimate gift of independence. I navigated to the security settings. I found the module labeled Age of Majority Transfer. The system prompted me to confirm my birth date. I typed it in. The system then asked if I wanted to revoke all secondary access cards linked to the previous temporary beneficiaries. I selected yes. A final warning popped up on the screen asking for authorization to freeze the accounts. I did not hesitate. I hit confirm. The loading circle spun for a few seconds before a green checkmark appeared. The system updated instantly. I watched the status tags next to their names change from active to suspended. Catherine's black card was deactivated. Thomas's platinum account was frozen. Brittany's unlimited spending line was completely shut down. With 3 simple clicks, I had cut off their financial oxygen supply. I closed my laptop, took a deep breath, and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. The silence in my apartment was deeply satisfying. I went about my day treating myself to a nice dinner and a quiet evening. I slept better than I had in years. The next morning, I woke up at 6 and reached for my phone. The screen was flooded with notifications. I had 80 missed calls. 80. The caller ID showed a frantic mix of numbers from Catherine Thomas and Brittany. I tapped my voicemail icon and played the most recent message. It was my father. His usual arrogant tone was completely gone, replaced by breathless panic. Paige, you need to answer your phone right now. We are standing at the front desk of the resort in Aspen, and they are threatening to call the local police. Every single one of our credit cards is declining. The hotel manager says we owe $15,000 for the week, and they are going to have us arrested for theft of services if we do not pay immediately. Call the bank. Fix this right now. Call me back. I listened to the message twice, letting the desperation in his voice wash over me. He wanted me to fix it. He thought it was a bank error. He had no idea that the daughter he cast aside had just become the most powerful person in his life. I deleted the voicemail, locked my phone screen, and walked to the kitchen to start my day. They told me never to contact them again, and I am a woman who respects boundaries. The phone vibrated against my kitchen counter for the 81st time. The caller ID flashed my father's name in glaring red letters. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my dark roast coffee, savoring the bitter taste, and finally picked up the device. I swiped the screen to answer, but I did not even get a chance to say a single word of greeting. My father's voice exploded through the speaker. He was frantic, breathless, and shouting at the top of his lungs about a massive bank error. He demanded that I immediately use my corporate accounting access to fix whatever glitch had frozen their accounts. In the chaotic background, I could hear a man with a stern voice repeating that local authorities were on their way to the lobby. Then the phone was forcefully snatched away, and my mother Catherine's shrill tone pierced my ear. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not apologize for her cruel birthday message. Instead, she barked an order like I was a disobedient servant. She commanded me to wire $15,000 from my measly accountant's salary straight to the Aspen Resort ledger. If I refused, she warned they would be arrested for theft of services, and it would be entirely my fault. I leaned back against the cool granite of my kitchen island. My heartbeat remained perfectly steady. I kept my voice perfectly level and recited her own text message back to her word for word. You wanted space. I am giving it to you. The line went dead silent for exactly 3 seconds before Catherine snapped. Her voice dripped with pure venom as she accused me of holding a petty, lifelong grudge. She shrieked that I was just a bitter, jealous woman who could never let go of the past simply because they chose not to fund my college education. I felt a cold, sharp smile form on my lips. I corrected her revisionist history right there on the phone. I reminded her that they did not simply choose not to pay for my education. They actively drained the private college trust fund my grandfather had set up specifically for me. They emptied that account to buy Brittany a brand new custom Porsche for her 19th birthday. They left me to take out crippling high-interest student loans and work grueling night shifts at a diner just to pay for my accounting textbooks. I reminded her how Brittany crashed that same expensive car 6 months later driving under the influence, and how they simply bought her another one. Catherine scoffed, dismissing my struggle completely. She claimed Brittany needed reliable luxury transportation for her important sorority events, and that I was always too dramatic about money. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or defend my worth. I simply told her that she should ask Brittany to sell her reliable transportation to pay the hotel bill. Then I hung up the phone. I blocked my father's number just as I had blocked my mother's and sister's numbers the night before. I later learned exactly what happened next through the frantic gossip of their elite country club circle. With their black cards declining and the resort manager threatening to call the police, my family faced a humiliating reality check. Catherine was forced to take off her prized 5-carat diamond tennis bracelet right in the hotel lobby. My father had to trudge down the snowy street in his designer ski boots to a local Aspen pawn shop. He had to stand at a glass counter and hand over the diamonds for a mere fraction of their actual worth, begging the broker for cash. The money was barely enough to settle their luxury hotel bill and purchase 3 economy-class tickets on a budget airline back to New York. My parents and my golden child sister spent the entire flight squeezed into middle seats near the restrooms, stripped of their precious first-class privileges. I spent the rest of my Sunday enjoying the absolute peace and quiet of my apartment. I prepped my meals for the week, went for a long run, and reviewed the final details of a corporate fraud case I was handling. My mind was sharp-focused and entirely free of the toxic guilt my family had conditioned me to feel for the past 33 years. I knew there would be fallout. People who have manipulated you your entire life do not simply surrender when you cut their financial puppet strings. They fight back, usually with more manipulation, aggression, and loud demands. But I was ready. I had spent my entire adult life building a career on tracking hidden assets, untangling financial webs, and exposing liars. My family was about to learn that they had picked a fight with the absolute worst opponent possible. Monday morning arrived crisp and bright. I dressed in a tailored navy blue power suit that fit perfectly, slipped on my favorite heels, and grabbed my leather briefcase. I walked into my firm's high-rise office building in downtown Manhattan, feeling invincible. I exchanged polite morning greetings with the security guards I had known for years. I swiped my badge at the security turnstile and made my way toward the private elevator bank. But as I rounded the corner into the expansive marble lobby, my peaceful morning came to a screeching halt. Standing right in the center of the polished floor, looking disheveled, exhausted, and absolutely furious, were my father and my sister. Thomas was pacing back and forth furiously, his face a dangerous shade of crimson. Brittany stood with her arms tightly crossed, clutching a cheap paper coffee cup. Instead of her usual artisanal latte, her designer ski jacket wrinkled from the terrible flight. But they were not alone. Flanking my father was a man in a cheap pinstripe suit clutching a battered leather briefcase. I recognized him instantly. He was the sleazy family lawyer my parents used to intimidate local contractors and bully small business owners. As soon as Brittany spotted me walking toward the elevators, her eyes narrowed with pure, unfiltered hatred. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest, signaling to the lawyer that the target had arrived. Thomas turned and immediately began projecting his voice, making sure the executives waiting for the elevators and the reception staff could hear every single word. "There is the little hacker," Thomas yelled, storming toward me. "Call her manager right now. I want her arrested for federal wire fraud. She illegally locked us out of our own bank accounts." I felt the eyes of my colleagues turning toward us. 10 years ago, this public humiliation would have sent me running for the exit in tears. My father had always used public shame to keep me in line and force my compliance. But today, I simply took a slow sip of my coffee. I walked right past the security desk, tapped my badge against the scanner, and gestured toward a soundproof glass conference room located just off the main lobby. "Step inside," I commanded, my voice cold and flat. "Unless you prefer broadcasting your financial ruin to the entire financial district. We can do this in front of my coworkers, or we can do it behind closed doors. Your choice." Thomas clamped his mouth shut. The sheer authority in my voice caught him completely off guard. The 3 of them followed me into the conference room like scolded children. Once the heavy glass door sealed us in, the cheap lawyer decided it was his time to shine. He slammed his hands on the table. He did not even introduce himself before sliding a thick stack of papers across the polished mahogany. Cease and desist, the lawyer barked, puffing out his chest to look intimidating. You are in direct violation of federal banking laws. You have illegally frozen the Winston family accounts, and if those funds are not fully restored within 24 hours, we will be pressing criminal charges for cyber theft and malicious interference. I did not even look at his meaningless paperwork. I set my coffee down, unlatched my own briefcase, and pulled out a single heavily bound folder bearing the gold seal of the state probate court. I slid it right back across the table at the lawyer. You might want to read the actual trust charter before you threaten a licensed forensic accountant with financial crimes, I said smoothly. The lawyer frowned, flipping open the folder. I watched his eyes scan the highlighted section. I watched the color completely drain from his face as the legal reality of the situation crashed down on him. As you can clearly see, counselor, I continued, making sure to enunciate every word. Thomas and Catherine Winston were never the owners of the Winston family wealth. They were designated strictly as temporary proxy beneficiaries by my late grandfather. Clause 4 states that upon my 33rd birthday, the proxy period terminates immediately and irrevocably. I am now the sole legal trustee and the absolute owner of the estate. I did not hack anything. I just changed the locks on my own house. The lawyer swallowed hard, physically stepping back from the table. He looked at Thomas, realizing his client had blatantly lied to him about owning the assets. Thomas snatched the document from the table, his eyes darting frantically across the legal jargon he had spent a decade ignoring. Brittany let out a piercing, high-pitched shriek. This is a trick. You cannot do this to me, Paige. I have a lifestyle to maintain. My credit cards are declining at boutiques all over the city. I need my $50,000 monthly allowance right now. I have a personal brand to uphold, and I have vendors waiting to be paid. Your brand is built on my money, Brittany, I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. And the allowance is permanently canceled. You are 30 years old. It is time to get a job. Thomas slammed his fist against the table, the thick glass rattling under the impact. He pointed a trembling, furious finger at my face. You manipulated him, Thomas roared. You got into your grandfather's head before he died and poisoned him against us. If you do not reverse this transfer immediately, I will sue you for elder financial abuse. I will tell a judge that you took advantage of a sick old man. I will tie you up in litigation for the next 20 years, and I will make sure your firm fires you for unethical conduct. Before I could formulate a response to his ridiculous empty threat, the glass door of the conference room swung open. The sudden noise made everyone freeze. You are not going to sue anyone, Thomas. The deep, commanding voice came from the doorway. We all turned. Standing there was Derek, Brittany's husband. Derek was a brilliant, hardworking African-American tech entrepreneur who had spent the last 3 years pouring his absolute soul into a new software startup. He looked sharp in a custom-tailored suit, but the exhaustion and pure fury radiating from his face were undeniable. Derek had always been the only decent person in Brittany's orbit, a man who actually worked for his success instead of demanding it. He walked into the conference room, completely ignoring my father's blustering and the lawyer's nervous shuffling. He walked straight up to the table, his eyes locked entirely on his wife. Brittany shrank back against the glass wall, the color draining from her cheeks. Derek held up his phone. The screen displayed an urgent red alert from his commercial bank. Brittany, Derek said, his voice terrifyingly calm but carrying an edge that made the hairs on my arms stand up. My chief financial officer just called me in an absolute panic. The $2 million wire transfer you promised to send this morning for my startup seed round just bounced. The bank flagged it for insufficient funds. My investors are waiting. My entire company is on the line today. What exactly is going on? Derek stood in the doorway of my glass conference room, his chest heaving with exertion. He had the hollow, haunted look of a man whose entire world was collapsing around him. He had spent the last 3 years building a health technology software platform from the ground up, pouring his blood, sweat, and endless sleepless nights into every single line of code. Brittany had promised him the vital seed funding. She had played the role of the supportive, incredibly wealthy venture capitalist wife to absolute perfection. She attended his pitch meetings in designer suits, charming his developers with promises of unlimited capital. Now the commercial bank had called him with the devastating truth. The wire transfer had bounced. Brittany did not miss a single beat. The tears sprang to her eyes with terrifying practice speed. She lunged forward, grabbing Derek by the arm and pointing a trembling manicured finger right at my face. "She stole it from us," Brittany wailed, her voice cracking with manufactured grief. "Paige hacked into my personal accounts this morning. She froze everything because she is jealous of our success. She is trying to destroy your company, Derek. She wants to see us fail." Derek gently but firmly detached his arm from her frantic grip. He did not yell. He did not immediately jump to defend his wife against the big bad sister. Derek had always been the singular anomaly in the toxic Winston family orbit. He was a self-made man who respected hard work and absolute logic. He knew exactly what I did for a living. He knew I was a certified forensic accountant who handled complex corporate audits and investigated major financial crimes. He looked at me, his dark eyes searching my face for any sign of malice or petty vengeance. "Paige," Derek said, keeping his voice carefully measured despite the obvious panic radiating from his posture. "I know you and your sister have your differences. I know this family has issues. But this is my life's work. Tell me you did not illegally freeze the capital for my seed round. Tell me this is just a mistake." I did not raise my voice. I did not hurl insults at my sister or try to match her hysterical energy. I simply reached out and swiveled my laptop around so the high-resolution screen faced Derek directly. "I did not freeze your seed round, Derek," I said evenly, holding his gaze. "I froze her credit limit. Step over here and look at the actual trust ledger. Read the numbers for yourself." Derek walked past my father Thomas and the sweating family lawyer who was still trying to comprehend that he had been dragged into a massive financial lie. Derek leaned over the polished mahogany table, his eyes instantly scanning the complex spreadsheet I had opened. As a tech chief executive officer, Derek knew exactly how to read a financial statement. I watched his eyes track the columns, tracing the sea of red numbers that painted a picture of absolute, undeniable financial ruin. "Brittany never had $2 million in liquid cash to give you," I explained, tapping the screen to highlight a specific cluster of offshore shell accounts. "The family trust issues her a strict $50,000 monthly allowance, but she has been spending closer to $200,000 a month for the last 5 years. Derek frowned deeply, leaning closer to the glowing screen, his mind trying to reconcile the math. "Then how was she funding the lifestyle? How was she going to fund my company today?" I pulled up the hidden loan documents I had uncovered during my extensive midnight audits. "She was not funding anything. She has been taking out predatory, extremely high-interest collateral loans against the trust's equity without proper authorization. She used those toxic loans to lease the luxury sports cars, buy the seasonal designer wardrobes, and pay for those endless luxury vacations she posts online. The money she promised you was just another illegal, desperate loan she tried to initiate yesterday. But the bank flagged it and blocked the transfer because her debt-to-equity ratio is completely catastrophic." Brittany lunged toward the table, her hands reaching out desperately, trying to slam the laptop shut. "Do not listen to her!" she screamed, her voice reaching a shrill pitch. "She is faking those documents. She typed those up to ruin my marriage." I blocked her hand effortlessly and pulled up the most damning piece of evidence I had found. This was the final nail in the coffin of her elaborate financial illusion. "Look at the corporate structuring she set up for your seed round," I told Derek, pointing to a highly complex tax document. "She was not investing in your startup. She deliberately structured the $2 million as a phantom loan. She planned to purposefully default on it within 6 months and use your software company as a massive tax write-off to cover her own mounting illegal debts. She was going to bankrupt your life's work to save herself from federal tax evasion charges." Derek stepped back from the table as if he had been physically struck. The silence in the glass conference room was heavy and suffocating. He looked at the hard data on the screen, then turned slowly to look at the woman he had married. The illusion was completely shattered. He saw her not as a wealthy, supportive partner, but as a financial parasite who was willing to utterly destroy his dream just to buy another season of fake luxury. "Tell me this is a lie," Derek demanded. His voice was low, vibrating with a dangerous, quiet intensity. "Look me in the eye right now and tell me you are not going to use my company as a tax shield for your shopping addiction." Brittany backed away, her flawless, confident facade completely crumbling under his stare. She looked frantically at our father for help, reverting to her role as the helpless golden child. "Daddy, do something," she cried, actual panic setting in. "Make her stop showing him this. Tell him she is lying." Derek let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed off the glass walls. He did not need her to confess. Her immediate deferral to her father and her sheer panic was all the confirmation he needed. "You lied to me for 3 entire years," Derek shouted finally, letting his fury explode. "You let me work 90-hour weeks telling me we had a massive safety net, telling me you believed in my vision. You were just waiting to use my company as a sacrificial lamb for your debts. We are done, Brittany. We are completely, legally done." He turned his back on her, reaching for the heavy metal handle of the conference room door. The marriage was over right there on the spot. Thomas realized his carefully constructed world was rapidly disintegrating. His golden child was being exposed as a fraud. His own financial supply had been ruthlessly cut off. And the brilliant son-in-law he secretly relied on for future tech investments was walking out the door forever. He could not lose control. He had spent his entire life dominating this family with money and fear, and he refused to let a daughter he despised strip him of his power. Thomas stepped aggressively directly into Derek's path, shoving his hands against Derek's chest to physically stop him from leaving the room. "You are not going anywhere, and you are not divorcing my daughter." Thomas snarled, his face inches from Derek's. "This entire situation is a temporary misunderstanding caused by a bitter, ungrateful, jealous child." Thomas then turned his wrath entirely on me. His face was a dark, dangerous shade of purple. He reached inside the breast pocket of his expensive tailored suit and pulled out a sharply folded piece of thick legal paper. He marched up to the conference table and slapped it down right over my laptop keyboard with a resounding smack. "You think you are so incredibly smart, Paige?" Thomas sneered, tapping the paper with a heavy, aggressive finger. "You think turning 33 suddenly gave you the keys to the kingdom? You forgot one minor detail. Your grandfather knew you were emotionally unstable. He knew you would try something vindictive and crazy like this the moment you had the chance." I stared down at the document on the table. It bore my grandfather's signature at the bottom, stamped with a heavy, official-looking blue notary seal. "That is an executive amendment to the trust," Thomas declared, his voice echoing loudly in the enclosed glass room. "Signed by your grandfather exactly 2 weeks before he died. It grants me permanent, irrevocable power of attorney over all of your financial assets regardless of your age or status. You do not control the trust, Paige. I do. And my very first act as your legal guardian is having you fired from this firm." I stared down at the piece of paper Thomas had just slammed onto my laptop keyboard. The crispness of the document contrasted sharply with the trembling of my father's hands. It was a supposed executive amendment to the family trust, granting him permanent and irrevocable power of attorney over all my assets. I leaned forward and scrutinized the signature at the bottom of the page. It was supposed to be my grandfather's handwriting, but the loops were shaky, lacking the sharp, decisive pressure my grandfather always applied to his pen. Worse than the bad forgery was the notary stamp sitting right next to it. "You actually paid someone to fabricate this," I said, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. "You are holding a forged legal document in a corporate accounting firm. Do you have any idea how much prison time that carries?" Thomas snatched the paper back, his face contorted into a mask of pure desperation and rage. He shoved it into his suit jacket and sneered. "It is real enough for a Judge, Page. I am going straight to family court to file an emergency injunction. I am going to freeze your control over everything, and I will have you declared mentally unfit to manage this estate. You just destroyed your sister's marriage, and now I am going to destroy your entire life." He grabbed Brittany by the arm, and the two of them stormed out of the glass conference room, followed closely by their sweating, terrified lawyer. I did not let the adrenaline shake me. I calmly packed up my laptop and walked back to my desk. I knew exactly what an emergency injunction meant. If a judge believed Thomas's forged document, even for a second, my access to the trust would be frozen while the court investigated. My father was banking on the legal system moving slowly, giving him enough time to regain control of the narrative. But I quickly realized that his legal threat was only the first phase of their attack. By noon, my phone began vibrating continuously on my desk. It was not my parents calling. The notifications were coming from former high school classmates, distant relatives, and family acquaintances I had not spoken to in years. I unlocked my screen and saw a link to a Facebook video that had been forwarded to me a dozen times. I clicked the link. The video opened to show my mother, Catherine, sitting on the plush cream sofa in her designer living room. She was wearing a modest cashmere cardigan and clutching a tissue to her chest. She looked straight into the camera and began to weep, though her eyes remained entirely dry. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this," Catherine sobbed to her audience. "But my husband and I are in fear for our safety. Our daughter Paige is having a severe psychological breakdown. She has illegally locked us out of our life savings, leaving us stranded and penniless. She has always been a troubled, deeply greedy child, but her mental instability has now become dangerous. Please, if anyone interacts with her, know that she is not in her right mind. We just want our daughter to get the psychiatric help she desperately needs." I watched the video twice, feeling a cold knot of recognition form in my stomach. This was the exact same tactic Catherine had used when I was 12 years old. Whenever Brittany stole cash from my mother's purse to buy designer clothes, Catherine would hold a family meeting and blame me, telling everyone that I was a troubled child acting out for attention. She had gaslit our entire extended family back then, and now she was scaling up the operation to gaslight the entire city. The video already had thousands of views. She had specifically tagged the members of her elite country club, ensuring the smear campaign hit the wealthiest circles of our community. Before I could even process a strategy to counter the video, my desk phone rang. It was Mr. Sterling, the managing partner of my forensic accounting firm. He asked me to step into his office immediately. When I walked into his spacious corner office, Mr. Sterling did not offer me a seat. He turned his computer monitor toward me. Catherine's tearful face was paused on his screen. "I have received emails from 3 different high-net-worth clients containing this link," Mr. Sterling said, his voice heavy with regret. "Paige, you are one of the most brilliant forensic accountants in this building. I know your family is notoriously difficult, but we manage the wealth of some of the most powerful people in this city. A senior auditor accused of elder financial abuse and mental instability is a public relations nightmare we cannot afford." I stood incredibly still, fighting the urge to defend myself emotionally. "Mr. Sterling, the claims in that video are entirely fabricated to cover up their own financial crimes. I have documented proof." "I believe you, Paige," he replied with a heavy sigh. "But until this is resolved legally, optics dictate our actions. I am placing you on mandatory paid administrative leave effective immediately. I need you to hand over your current case files and go home." I nodded slowly, realizing the true brilliance of my father's strategy. Thomas and Catherine were not just trying to embarrass me, they were executing a calculated war of attrition. By destroying my professional reputation, they were cutting off my primary source of income. They wanted to drain my resources so I would not be able to afford the elite defense attorneys required to fight their forged injunction in family court. They wanted to starve me out until I surrendered the trust. I packed my personal belongings into a small box and left the building through the back exit to avoid the whispers of my coworkers. When I arrived back at my apartment, I did not waste time feeling sorry for myself. I walked straight into my home office, powered up my dual monitors, and opened my encrypted financial software. If they wanted a war over the accounts, they were going to get one. I began transferring the trust ledgers to a secure offline server to protect the data from any court-ordered freeze. As my fingers flew across the keyboard, a glaring red alert suddenly flashed across my secondary monitor. A silent alarm I had coded directly into the trust's security infrastructure had just been triggered. Someone was attempting a brute force cyber attack on the grandfather's offshore accounts located in the Cayman Islands. The security log showed that the attacker was actively trying to bypass the two-factor authentication, using my exact social security number, my mother's maiden name, and my childhood street address. They were answering security questions only a family member would know. I quickly deployed a tracing program, locking onto the source of the unauthorized access attempt. The digital footprint bypassed a clumsy virtual private network and pinged directly off a local internet service provider. I watched the geographic coordinates narrow down on my screen until the map pinpointed the exact location. The IP address belonged to the router in Thomas's home office at the family mansion. My father was not waiting for a judge to grant his fake injunction. He was actively trying to hack into the offshore accounts to drain the cash before the court system even opened its doors. I did not sleep that night. I captured every packet of data, every failed login attempt from my father's IP address, and compiled the evidence onto a secure encrypted flash drive. By the time the sun rose over the city, I was already dressed in a sharp charcoal gray suit, walking up the marble steps of the county courthouse. My father thought he could drain the offshore accounts before a judge even looked at his paperwork. He failed. Now he was going to try and steal my legal authority right in front of a magistrate. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B swung shut behind me. Thomas, Catherine, and Brittany were already seated at the petitioner table. They had clearly spent the morning coordinating their outfits to look like the perfect aggrieved family. Catherine wore a subdued pastel dress, dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes with a monogram tissue. Brittany sat with her head bowed, playing the traumatized fragile sister. Thomas sat tall, his chest puffed out, radiating an arrogant confidence that made my stomach turn. Flanking them was the same sleazy attorney from my office lobby organizing a stack of stolen narratives. I took my seat next to my attorney Marcus, a brilliant litigator who never wasted his breath on theatrics. I slid the encrypted flash drive across the table to him. I whispered that Thomas had spent the night trying to hack the Cayman accounts. Marcus did not even blink. He just slipped the drive into his pocket and nodded toward the front of the room as the judge entered. Judge Eleanor Vance was a stern, no-nonsense woman with decades of experience on the bench. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and immediately called for the petitioner to present their case for an emergency injunction. Thomas's lawyer stood up, buttoning his cheap jacket. He launched into a highly rehearsed, emotionally manipulative performance. He painted a picture of a loving, supportive family, utterly blindsided by a vindictive, unstable daughter. He claimed I was using my professional skills as a forensic accountant to exact petty childhood revenge, locking my aging parents out of the funds they needed to survive. He dramatically waved the forged power of attorney document in the air. "Your Honor," he proclaimed, his voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. The late Winston Patriarch knew his granddaughter struggled with severe emotional volatility. That is exactly why mere weeks before his tragic passing, he drafted this executive amendment. It clearly grants my client Thomas Winston permanent and irrevocable power of attorney over all estate assets. We are simply asking the court to honor a dying man's final wish and stop this rogue accountant from destroying her own family. The lawyer handed the heavily sealed document to the bailiff, who passed it up to the bench. I watched my father smirk. I watched Brittany literally do a little celebratory shoulder shimmy in her seat. They thought they had won. Judge Vance reviewed the paperwork in silence. The courtroom felt completely devoid of air. She traced the signature with her eyes, noted the blue notary stamp, and looked over her glasses directly at me. Her expression was unreadable, but her words sent a chill through the room. On its face, the judge stated firmly, "This document appears to be a legally binding notarized amendment. Given the severity of the financial freeze and the immediate distress placed upon the petitioners, I am inclined to grant the temporary injunction to transfer fiduciary control back to Thomas Winston pending a full investigation." Thomas let out a loud, victorious sigh. Catherine grabbed his hand, smiling tearfully at the judge. Marcus stood up slowly. He did not raise his voice. He did not object to the emotional slander they had just hurled at me. He simply picked up a thin manila folder and approached the bench. "Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice calm and lethal, "we do not contest that the document possesses a notary stamp. We contest the physical impossibility of its existence." The judge frowned, looking between Marcus and the document. "Explain, counselor." Marcus handed the manila folder to the bailiff. "I ask the court to direct its attention to the specific notary commission number stamped next to the late Mr. Winston's supposed signature. You will see it belongs to a licensed state notary named Arthur Pendleton. In the folder I just provided, you will find certified records directly from the State Department of Licensing. Thomas suddenly stopped smiling. He shifted his weight, his expensive chair creaking loudly in the dead silent room. Arthur Pendleton. Marcus continued, his voice echoing like a gavel striking wood, did not complete his state certification exam, nor was he issued that specific commission number until 2 full years after the grandfather passed away. It is chronologically and physically impossible for that stamp to have been placed on a document signed by a dead man. The silence that followed was absolute. Judge Vance looked down at the documents provided by Marcus. She looked at the date of death. She looked at the state licensing record. Then she slowly raised her eyes to look at my father. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The opposing lawyer physically stepped away from Thomas. He began frantically shuffling his papers, stammering that he was only presenting documents provided to him by his client, desperately trying to save his own law license. Judge Vance slammed the forged document down onto her desk. The sharp crack made Brittany jump out of her seat. Injunction denied. Judge Vance declared, her voice vibrating with pure judicial fury. Mr. Winston presenting a fabricated legal document to this court is a direct insult to the justice system and a Class D felony. You have just committed perjury and attempted fraud in my courtroom. I am immediately forwarding a full transcript of today's proceedings along with this forged document directly to the district attorney's office for criminal review. Thomas's face lost all its color. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and finally realized gravity was real. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The bailiff stepped forward, gesturing for them to clear the tables. The hearing was over. I gathered my briefcase and walked out of the courtroom, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. I felt an incredible surge of victory. I had not just defended my grandfather's legacy, I had handed my father the rope he used to hang himself. But as I pushed through the heavy oak doors into the crowded hallway, a hand grabbed my bicep with bruising force. I turned sharply. It was Catherine. She was no longer playing the role of the weeping, victimized mother. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. Her manicured nails dug into my jacket sleeve. "You think you are so brilliant?" Catherine hissed, her voice a toxic whisper right next to my ear. "You think you have won because of some stupid stamp. You do not even know the real reason your grandfather locked us out of that money. You have no idea what is actually hiding in this family. If I am going down for this page, I promise you I am taking your entire pristine reputation down with me." Thomas realized his carefully constructed world was rapidly disintegrating. His golden child was being exposed as a fraud. His own financial supply had been ruthlessly cut off, and the brilliant son-in-law he secretly relied on for future tech investments was walking out the door forever. He could not lose control. He had spent his entire life dominating this family with money and fear, and he refused to let a daughter he despised strip him of his power. Thomas stepped aggressively directly into Derek's path, shoving his hands against Derek's chest to physically stop him from leaving the room. "You are not going anywhere, and you are not divorcing my daughter." Thomas snarled, his face inches from Derek's. "This entire situation is a temporary misunderstanding caused by a bitter, ungrateful, jealous child." Thomas then turned his wrath entirely on me. His face was a dark, dangerous shade of purple. He reached inside the breast pocket of his expensive tailored suit and pulled out a sharply folded piece of thick legal paper. He marched up to the conference table and slapped it down right over my laptop keyboard with a resounding smack. "You think you are so incredibly smart?" Paige, Thomas sneered, tapping the paper with a heavy, aggressive finger. "You think turning 33 suddenly gave you the keys to the kingdom? You forgot one minor detail. Your grandfather knew you were emotionally unstable. He knew you would try something vindictive and crazy like this the moment you had the chance." I stared down at the document on the table. It bore my grandfather's signature at the bottom, stamped with a heavy, official-looking blue notary seal. "That is an executive amendment to the trust," Thomas declared, his voice echoing loudly in the enclosed glass room. "Signed by your grandfather exactly 2 weeks before he died. It grants me permanent, irrevocable power of attorney over all of your financial assets regardless of your age or status." You do not control the trust page. I do. And my very first act as your legal guardian is having you fired from this firm. Catherine's desperate hallway threat hung in the air for exactly 3 days before she attempted to make good on her promise. She wanted a public spectacle, and the annual Sapphire Winter Gala at the Plaza Hotel provided the perfect battleground. I could have stayed in my apartment. I could have hidden away from the elite social circles my family had spent decades cultivating. Instead, I chose to walk directly into the lion's den. I arrived at the grand ballroom wearing a custom-tailored, immaculate white silk designer suit. I walked down the sweeping marble staircase with my head held high. The room was a sea of black tuxedos and glittering evening gowns, filled with the city's most powerful financiers, politicians, and socialites. It did not take long for the whispers to start. My parents and Brittany were holding court near the ice sculpture, desperately trying to project an image of untouchable wealth despite the legal and financial disaster looming over them. As soon as Catherine spotted me, her face tightened into a mask of pure aristocratic disdain. She immediately grabbed the arm of the gala director, a notoriously strict woman named Evelyn, and marched directly toward me. "Evelyn, darling," Catherine announced, ensuring her voice carried over the string quartet. "You have a serious security breach. This woman is a party crasher. My daughter Paige has been dealing with severe financial and mental instability. She certainly cannot afford a ticket to this event. You need to have her escorted out before she causes a scene and ruins the evening for your actual donors." Evelyn looked at me with immediate suspicion, gesturing for a nearby security guard. I did not break eye contact with my mother. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a heavy, solid gold card. I handed it to the director. "I am not a ticket holder, Evelyn," I said with a warm, steady smile. "I am the platinum corporate sponsor for tonight's charity drive. My firm wired the $200,000 underwriting fee yesterday morning. If Catherine feels uncomfortable standing near the event's primary benefactor, my security team can gladly escort her to the street." Evelyn glanced at the gold card, her eyes widening in immediate recognition. She stammered a profound apology to me and shot Catherine a look of absolute disgust before quickly walking away. Catherine stood frozen, her jaw slightly open, completely humiliated in front of the very people she was trying to impress. Before Catherine could formulate a response, Brittany stepped out from behind her mother. She was holding a brimmed glass of dark red wine. She locked eyes with me, plastered a fake, terrified smile on her face, and violently lunged forward. She intentionally stumbled, throwing her arm out and launching the entire glass of red wine directly at my chest. The dark crimson liquid splashed across my immaculate white silk lapel, instantly blooming into a massive, undeniable stain. "Oh my God, I am so clumsy!" Brittany loudly gasped, covering her mouth with her hand while her eyes danced with malicious joy. I tripped on my heel. "You really should not wear white if you cannot afford to have it dry cleaned, Paige." I looked down at the ruined silk. My heart beat at a perfectly calm rhythm. I did not flinch. This was the exact same tactic she had used when I was 18 years old. I had spent an entire summer waitressing to afford my dream white prom dress. 10 minutes before my date arrived, Brittany had supposedly tripped with a full glass of cherry punch, ruining the dress, and leaving me sobbing in my room while my mother told me to stop being so dramatic over a clumsy mistake. I had cried then. I was not crying now. "You always did lack originality, Brittany," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. The tension in the ballroom was shattered by the sharp ringing of a microphone. The charity auction was beginning. Thomas, desperate to reclaim the family's shattered dignity and prove his financial dominance to the whispering crowd, immediately marched to the front row. The auctioneer presented the premier item of the night, a private Mediterranean villa retreat. $50,000! Thomas shouted, raising his paddle aggressively. I knew for an absolute fact that his bank accounts were frozen. He was bidding with phantom money, banking on his reputation to secure the bid and figuring out the fraud later. He looked back at me, a smug, challenging grin on his face. I wiped a drop of wine from my lapel, walked calmly down the center aisle, and stopped right next to the podium. $250,000, I stated clearly into the room. The crowd erupted into shocked murmurs. Thomas lowered his paddle, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He did not have the funds to counter, and everyone in the room knew it. The auctioneer slammed the gavel, awarding me the bid. I did not step down. I turned to face the crowd, stepping directly up to the microphone. "Thank you," I addressed the silent ballroom. "In addition to this bid, I would like to announce an immediate $2 million endowment to this charity. This donation is made on behalf of the newly established Winston Heritage Trust. I am deeply honored to use my grandfather's wealth exactly as he intended, by supporting this community rather than funding the fraudulent, empty lifestyles of those who merely pretend to have power." The silence was deafening. The sheer magnitude of the donation combined with my pointed words exposed my family completely. Thomas looked like he was going to be physically sick. Catherine was shaking with rage. Brittany could not handle the crushing humiliation. She spun around and grabbed Derek, who had been standing silently near the back of the room the entire night. Derek looked exhausted, his posture rigid. "Do something!" Brittany screeched at her husband, her voice echoing shrilly across the silent gala. "Defend me! She is humiliating us! Tell them she is a liar! Be a man and defend your wife!" Derek looked at Brittany. There was no anger left in his eyes, only a profound, hollow disgust. He looked at the woman who had lied to him, who had jeopardized his company, and who was currently throwing a tantrum in a room full of the city's elite. Derek did not say a single word to her. He calmly unbuttoned his expensive tailored suit jacket and slipped it off his shoulders. He walked directly past his screeching wife and stepped up to me. With quiet, deliberate respect, Derek draped his dark jacket over my shoulders, completely covering the glaring red wine stain on my white suit. He gave me a brief, firm nod of respect. Then Derek turned his back on the entire Winston family. He walked down the center aisle and out the heavy brass doors of the ballroom, leaving the gala and his wife entirely alone. The morning after the Sapphire Winter Gala, the city was still buzzing with the scandal. I sat in the corner booth of a quiet, unassuming coffee shop situated far from the financial district. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, watching the rain streak the window pane. The bell above the door chimed, and Derek walked in. He looked entirely different from the man who had stood in my conference room just days prior. The exhaustion was still etched deeply into the lines of his face, but the desperate confusion was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, sharpened clarity. He slid into the booth opposite me. He did not bother with small talk or pleasantries. He placed a rose gold iPad on the table and pushed it directly toward me. It was Brittany's. Derek leaned forward, keeping his voice low. "I packed my bags last night while she was still screaming in the hotel lobby," he said, his tone devoid of any affection. "I am filing for divorce first thing tomorrow morning. But I need your help, Paige. Brittany deeply entangled my company in her financial mess. I need the best forensic accountant in the city to track exactly where her fraudulent loans intersect with my corporate accounts. I need to sever my life's work from your family before the ship completely sinks." I nodded, pulling the iPad closer. "I understand," I replied quietly. "You need a surgical extraction." Derek tapped the glass screen, waking up the device. "I need more than that," he stated, his eyes locking onto mine. "I spent the entire night tearing through her digital footprint. You were right about her shadow loans, but it is infinitely worse than you thought. Look at the secure email folder I unlocked. Your parents are not just broke, Paige, they are actively in danger." I opened the encrypted mail application Derek had isolated on the home screen. As my eyes scanned the top tier of communications, the sheer magnitude of my family's deception crystallized into a terrifying picture. Thomas and Catherine Winston were not simply dealing with declined black cards or a temporary liquidity crisis. They were $5 million in debt. I scrolled through the PDF attachments, my professional training taking over as I rapidly analyzed the loan terms. This was not a traditional line of credit from a regulated commercial bank. No legitimate financial institution would have ever approved this level of debt based on their actual income. Instead, Thomas had borrowed the $5 million from a predatory, unregulated private lending syndicate. These were the kind of shadow lenders who did not send polite collection letters. They seized assets with ruthless, immediate aggression. "What did he use for collateral?" I asked, though a sickening realization was already settling in my gut. Derek pointed to a heavily redacted contract on the screen. The family estate. He leveraged the entire family mansion. I leaned back against the leather booth, processing the absolute insanity of my father's arrogance. Catherine had just hosted a televised charity luncheon in that exact mansion last month, parading around her manicured gardens and boasting about generational wealth. All while a syndicate of loan sharks held the actual deed to the property. I traced the timeline of the emails connecting the dates to my grandfather's rapidly declining health. It all made perfect, sinister sense. Thomas had taken out the massive shadow loans 6 months ago to aggressively sustain their illusion of extreme wealth. He had banked everything on the absolute certainty that he would retain permanent control over my grandfather's trust. Thomas fully intended to use my inheritance to pay off the syndicate the moment my grandfather passed away. But my grandfather had outsmarted him. He had legally terminated the proxy period, naming me the sole irrevocable trustee. By freezing the accounts and locking Thomas out, I had inadvertently severed his only lifeline. "Look at the final message in the inbox," Derek said, his voice grim. It came through at 3 in the morning. I tapped the bolded subject line. It was a formal, chillingly brief notice of default. Thomas had missed the massive balloon payment that was due 48 hours after my grandfather's death. Because the funds were not wired, the syndicate was activating the seizure clause. The email stated they were initiating an aggressive, immediate foreclosure process. They were giving Thomas exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises before their recovery team arrived to physically lock down the estate. Catherine's tearful viral Facebook video from yesterday took on an entirely new pathetic context. She had not just been trying to ruin my professional reputation. She was terrified. She was days away from being violently evicted from her prized mansion, and she was desperately trying to force me to release the trust funds to save her social standing. "I am downloading all of this to a secure server," I told Derek, quickly connecting a data transfer cable from my briefcase. "I will isolate your company's seed round from Brittany's fraudulent cross-collateralization. You will have a clean financial defense for your divorce attorney by tomorrow afternoon." Derek let out a long, shuddering breath, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. "Thank you, Paige. I am sorry you were born into this nightmare." He stood up, gave me a respectful nod, and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving the wreckage of his marriage and the Winston family firmly behind him. I sat alone in the quiet booth watching the data transfer complete. My family was entirely out of options. Their credit was gone, their reputation was rapidly unraveling, and their home was about to be seized by dangerous creditors. I closed the iPad and slipped it into my bag, preparing to head to my lawyer's office to finalize the defensive strategy against the fake injunction. Just as I stood up, my cell phone vibrated sharply against the wooden table. It was a text message from Thomas. It was not a demand from his cheap lawyer. It was not a threat to sue me for elder abuse, and it was not a plea for a temporary loan. It was a message of pure, unhinged desperation from a man who knew he was staring down the barrel of total destruction. I stared at the glowing screen, my blood turning to absolute ice as I read his words. "Meet me at the mansion alone, or I release the truth about who your real father is." I did not reply to his text. I simply grabbed my keys and headed straight for my car. The drive to the Winston estate took exactly 40 minutes, but it felt like traversing an entirely different reality. The imposing iron gates of the mansion were wide open. There was no security guard, no perfectly manicured landscaping crew, just a chilling, absolute silence surrounding the massive brick property. Knowing that a syndicate of shadow lenders was 48 hours away from forcefully seizing the estate cast a dark, pathetic shadow over the pristine columns and manicured lawns. I walked through the heavy mahogany front doors without knocking. The house felt entirely empty. I found my father in his private study. The man who had spent my entire life projecting an image of untouchable corporate dominance was completely unrecognizable. Thomas was slumped behind his desk, his tie undone, his expensive shirt wrinkled and stained with spilled scotch. He looked up at me with bloodshot, frantic eyes. The desperation radiating from him was palpable. He did not offer a greeting. He just launched straight into his engineered psychological warfare. "You never belonged in this family, Paige." Thomas sneered, his voice raspy and slurred. "You always wondered why Catherine and I treated Brittany differently. You thought it was just simple favoritism. You thought we were just blind to her faults. You were wrong." I stood perfectly still in the center of the room. "What are you talking about?" Thomas stood up, leaning his heavy weight against the desk. 34 years ago, your mother had a prolonged affair with a contractor working on our first house." He stated, his words dripping with venom. "You are not my biological daughter. You are a bastard child, a walking, talking mistake that nearly destroyed my marriage." The air vanished from my lungs. A sudden violent wave of nausea hit me. For a fraction of a second, the puzzle pieces of my childhood seemed to snap into a horrifying logical order. The coldness, the emotional distance, the way my mother looked at me with disguised resentment, and the way my father elevated Brittany to untouchable status. "Your grandfather knew everything." Thomas continued, stepping out from behind the desk to press his advantage. He was utterly terrified of a public scandal. He knew that if the truth about Catherine's infidelity and your illegitimacy ever leaked to the financial press, it would shatter the Winston family's pristine corporate reputation. That is the real reason he set up the proxy trust and ultimately transferred the assets into your name. It was not because he believed in your brilliance. It was hush money. He was paying for your silence and keeping the stain on our family locked away in an offshore account. I stared at him, my mind spinning. Thomas took another step forward, pulling a drafted legal settlement from his desk. "I have contacts at the Wall Street Journal and Forbes." Thomas threatened, his voice dropping into a dangerous extortionist register. Imagine the headlines: "Page, the brilliant ethical forensic accountant whose entire identity, family history, and inherited wealth is built on a massive, shameful fraud. Your corporate clients will drop you overnight. Your firm will terminate you permanently. You will be a laughingstock. But I will keep my mouth shut and take this secret to my grave on one condition. You sign this transfer release today. You wire $5 million to clear my debts and you walk away." He thought he had completely cornered me. He thought the sheer emotional trauma of discovering my illegitimacy would shatter my defenses and force me into an immediate panicked payout. He underestimated my professional training. I did not operate on panic. I operated on hard, undeniable data. "If what you are saying is true," I said, my voice eerily calm, "then you will have absolutely no problem proving it. I am not wiring a single cent based on a story from a man currently defaulting on a shadow loan. I want a DNA test, right now." Thomas laughed, a harsh, aggressive sound. He slammed his hand against the doorframe. "Fine," he barked. "Order the test, but my deadline for the money is tomorrow night. If the funds are not in my account by the time the sun goes down, I am making the phone calls." I did not waste another second looking at him. I pulled out my phone and called a private concierge medical service I frequently utilized for high-profile corporate clients who required immediate discrete drug and genetic testing for executive insurance policies. I paid an exorbitant emergency fee to have a certified medical technician dispatched to the mansion within the hour. Thomas and I sat in silence while the technician swabbed our cheeks and sealed the vials in tamper-evident packaging. I paid an additional premium for an expedited 24-hour rapid panel. As the technician drove away, Thomas gave me one last arrogant, threatening glare. He honestly believed his aggressive bluff would force my hand before the lab could even process the samples. I left the mansion and drove straight to my apartment. I spent the next 24 hours methodically preparing for the worst. If the story was true, I needed to preemptively draft a public relations strategy to protect my firm and my clients. I barely slept. I sat at my kitchen island, staring at the blank screen of my laptop, waiting for the secure email from the genetic laboratory. At exactly 2 in the afternoon the next day, the notification chimed. I opened the encrypted portal, my hands unusually unsteady. I entered my password and downloaded the official laboratory report. I scrolled past the methodology and the legal disclaimers, my eyes dropping straight to the final conclusion bolded at the bottom of the page. Probability of paternity 99.99%. I read the number again, and then a third time. The air in my apartment felt suddenly freezing. I was not an affair child. Catherine had never strayed with a contractor. My grandfather had never paid hush money to hide a scandal. Thomas was my biological father. The sick, twisting knot of anxiety in my stomach instantly hardened into a core of absolute terrifying rage. My father had not just lied to me, he had looked his own biological daughter in the eye and fabricated a horrifying, emotionally devastating story about her mother's infidelity and her own illegitimacy. He had tried to psychologically destroy my entire sense of identity for the sole pathetic purpose of extorting $5 million to pay off a mob debt. He had weaponized his own paternity. I slowly closed the laptop screen. Thomas wanted a war. He was about to find out exactly what happens when you try to extort the woman who holds all the keys to the kingdom. The silence of my apartment, usually a sanctuary of controlled data and precise calculations, felt heavy with the weight of the war Thomas had just declared. I didn't reach for a glass of wine to soothe my nerves. I reached for my secondary, fully encrypted server. Thomas had finally crossed the line from corporate maneuvering to blatant criminal activity, and in doing so, he had handed me the final piece of evidence I needed to dismantle his entire existence. I didn't have to wait long for the first volley. By 9 a.m. the following morning, my firm's secure internal network began to scream. A massive high-velocity data exfiltration was underway, targeting the private financial portfolios of my highest-profile corporate clients. My team went into immediate panic mode. Before I could even issue the standard emergency protocols, the firm's lead security partner, Marcus, entered my office, his face pale. "Paige, we have a catastrophic breach," he said, his voice tight. "It's coming from your local node. Every log we've pulled in the last hour points directly to your credentials and your personal terminal." I looked at the screen, watching the digital slaughter. The file paths being accessed were mine. The secure encryption keys being bypassed were linked to my unique biometric ID. It was a masterpiece of digital framing specifically tailored to ruin me permanently. "You're suspended effective immediately," Marcus said, the standard legal tone failing to mask his disappointment. "The FBI Cybercrimes Division is already on site. We have to cooperate with the Federal Investigation Page. They're taking your devices. Everything." I didn't protest. I didn't beg for my reputation or plead my case. I simply stood up, handed Marcus my firm-issued smartphone and my laptop bag, and allowed them to escort me out of the building. As I stepped onto the cold city sidewalk, my phone chimed. It was a message from Catherine. The text was brief, triumphant, and dripping with the toxic familiar venom I had been exposed to my entire life. "See, you're nothing without us. You're a disgraced accountant with a pending federal felony charge. Unfreeze the trust and we'll make the investigation go away. Think about your future, Paige." I leaned against the brick facade of my firm's building, the morning traffic of the city blurring into a gray smear of sound. I should have been devastated. I should have been frantically searching for a criminal defense attorney to mitigate the impending damage to my career. Instead, I pulled a small, innocuous-looking burner phone from my coat pocket and sent a single text to my lead attorney. "It's done," I wrote. "They took the bait. Initiate Phase 2. My lawyer called back within seconds. "The FBI agents were inside your office the moment you left," he said, his voice calm. "They are currently cloning the hard drives of the devices you handed over. They think they found the smoking gun." I smiled, a cold, sharp expression that felt entirely appropriate for the moment. The laptop I had handed over to Marcus and subsequently to the federal agents was a sophisticated, high-fidelity honeypot. It wasn't my real machine. It was a decoy server meticulously staged with misleading digital breadcrumbs that had been designed to lure exactly this kind of amateur, heavy-handed attack. For weeks, I had anticipated Thomas would get desperate. I knew he would try to leverage his tech-illiterate connections to compromise me. I had simply made it easier for him. I sat in my apartment watching the remote dashboard of my true heavily secured workstation. While the federal agents were busy analyzing the dummy files on the honeypot, my own system was quietly recording everything. The intruder hadn't just breached my decoy, they had left a wide-open digital door leading directly back to the origin point. The IP address was already confirmed. It was routed through a residential server in the Hamptons, the exact location of Brittany's secondary vacation residence. I opened the keystroke log file, a detailed time-stamped record of every single character typed by the intruder during the breach. It was all there. Brittany's distinctive typing cadence, her habit of using specific shorthand, and even the accidental typos she made when she got frustrated. I scrolled through the logs, watching her progress in real time. I could see her laughing, I could see her arrogance, and I could see her absolute certainty that she had successfully framed me. She had even taken the time to browse my private correspondence, leaving behind enough digital clutter to confirm her identity 3 times over. I took a deep, steadying breath. Thomas and Catherine thought they could weaponize the federal government to break me. They thought they could use a baseless criminal investigation to blackmail me into surrendering the trust. They had no idea that they were currently participating in their own digital execution. I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer again. "I don't need a defense attorney for a wrongful termination case," I told him. "I need a liaison for the FBI. I have the IP address, the origin MAC address, and the complete documented keystroke log of the person who committed the breach. It wasn't an external hacker. It was Brittany Winston. I have everything they need to make the arrest, including the motive, the method, and the digital signature she was too stupid to mask." The phone went silent for a moment. "Paige," he finally said, his voice filled with newfound respect. "You didn't just catch her, you let her walk right into a federal trap." I looked at the screen, at the list of files Brittany had tried to steal, and at the name she had foolishly signed to her own crime. This wasn't just justice. This was the final, inevitable resolution of a war she had started with a glass of wine and ended with a federal felony. I started the export of the evidence packet. It was time for the Winstons to learn that in the world of forensic accounting, the truth isn't just an abstract concept. It's a trail of data that always, without exception, leads back to the person who tried to bury it. I wasn't the one who was finished. They were. I walked into the FBI field office in downtown Manhattan less than an hour later. My attorney Marcus was already waiting in the lobby. We were immediately escorted into a stark windowless conference room where Special Agent Miller, a veteran investigator for the Cybercrimes Division, was reviewing the preliminary incident report from my firm. He looked up, his expression hardened, clearly expecting to interrogate a rogue corporate accountant who had just compromised millions in highly sensitive client assets. I did not wait for him to start his questioning. I placed the encrypted flash drive on the metal table and pushed it directly toward him. "I am not your suspect, Agent Miller," I stated, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "I am your cooperating witness, and this drive contains the exact blueprint of a federal cybercrime committed against my firm this morning." I opened my secure laptop and mirrored the data for him. I walked him through the architecture of the honeypot server I had built. I showed him the digital tripwires Brittany had blindly stumbled through. I highlighted the IP address bouncing directly from the Winston family's Hamptons vacation property, the unmasked MAC address of her personal rose gold iPad, and the irrefutable keystroke logs. I explained how she bypassed the decoy security protocols to access dummy files labeled with high net worth client portfolios, intending to frame me for corporate espionage. Agent Miller leaned forward, his skepticism entirely vanishing as he scrolled through the raw data. He recognized the digital fingerprint of an arrogant amateur who thought extreme wealth could mask a catastrophic federal offense. "This is a direct violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act," Agent Miller said, his tone shifting to absolute lethal professionalism. "She attempted to exfiltrate protected financial data across state lines. This elevates the situation from a corporate breach to federal wire fraud and cyber espionage." I nodded, closing my laptop. "My family is currently $5 million in debt to an unregulated private lending syndicate," I added, handing him the printed dossiers Derek had provided me. "They have a 48-hour deadline before their primary estate is violently seized. They orchestrated this cyber attack to blackmail me into unfreezing my grandfather's trust. They are desperate and they are extreme flight risks." Agent Miller did not waste another second. He grabbed the flash drive and the dossiers and immediately left the room to secure the federal warrants. The bureaucratic red tape dissolved the moment he presented the hard, undeniable evidence to a federal judge. By dawn the next morning, the tactical operation was fully authorized and in motion. I did not sit safely in my apartment to wait for a phone call. I drove to my family's affluent neighborhood, parking my car discreetly 3 blocks away from the Winston estate. The morning air was crisp and completely silent, the perfectly manicured street lined with multi-million-dollar homes. That elite silence was violently shattered by the arrival of 8 matte black federal SUVs. They rolled into the neighborhood in a tight, aggressive formation, their tires screeching against the pristine asphalt. They did not politely ring the doorbell. Dozens of federal agents wearing heavy tactical gear and windbreakers emblazoned with the FBI logo swarmed the perimeter of the massive estate. The heavy mahogany front doors were breached with a tactical ram, the sound cracking through the quiet neighborhood like a gunshot. Within minutes, the wealthy residents of the gated community began stepping out of their mansions. Neighbors wrapped in cashmere morning robes stood on their pristine lawns, holding their coffee cups, their eyes wide with absolute shock as the Winston family's carefully crafted illusion of superiority was publicly decimated. Catherine was brought out first. She was barefoot, wearing a silk dressing gown, her hair a chaotic mess. She was screaming hysterically at the federal agents, demanding they release her and threatening to sue them for ruining her social standing. The agents ignored her entirely, securing her wrists tightly behind her back with heavy plastic zip ties and forcing her into the back of an SUV. Brittany was next. She was not screaming. She was completely broken. The malicious, arrogant girl who had thrown a glass of wine at my chest just days ago was now hyperventilating, her makeup smeared down her face in dark streaks. Her knees buckled under her weight, and an agent practically had to drag her down her own front steps. She looked utterly pathetic, stripped of her fake confidence and facing the terrifying reality of federal prison. Finally, Thomas was hauled out the front door. He tried desperately to maintain his authoritative posture, puffing out his chest and barking orders at the agents demanding to speak to his high-priced lawyer. But his expensive pajamas were rumpled, and his face was a pale, sickly gray. He looked exactly like what he was, a cornered, fraudulent animal who had finally run out of runway. The neighbors watched in silent, brutal judgment as the patriarch of the Winston family was shoved into a federal vehicle. I started my car engine and quietly drove away, feeling an immense, profound sense of closure. The war was over, but the Winston family's destruction was not finished. Later that afternoon, Marcus called me with an urgent update. The FBI was currently executing a comprehensive search warrant, tearing through every inch of the mansion to secure digital devices and financial records. In Thomas's private study, hidden behind a false wall panel, behind his mahogany bookshelves, the agents had found a heavy, old-fashioned steel safe. They cracked it open, expecting to find the hard drives or the shadow loan contracts. They found something infinitely worse. Page Marcus said, his voice laced with absolute disbelief. Thomas was not just borrowing from a dangerous syndicate. The agent seized a stack of physical handwritten accounting ledgers hidden in that safe. Thomas has been the treasurer of the Oak Ridge Elite Country Club for the past 10 years. I gripped my phone tightly, my forensic accounting instincts immediately recognizing the horrifying implication. The ledgers prove it. Marcus continued, dropping the final devastating bomb. Thomas has been systematically embezzling millions of dollars directly from the country club's employee pension fund. He has been stealing the retirement money of the groundskeepers, the servers, and the maintenance staff for a decade to secretly fund his bankrupt lifestyle. The cyber attack was just the beginning. Your father is looking at 20 years for grand larceny and pension fraud. It took exactly 48 hours for the legendary Winston family loyalty to completely evaporate. The federal magistrate had set their bail at an astronomical sum, forcing them to liquidate the last of their untainted offshore accounts, just to avoid sitting in a holding cell. Stripped of their seized mansion, their frozen trust funds, and their black cards, Thomas, Catherine, and Brittany were forced into a cramped extended-stay business hotel near the airport. Confined in a cheap 2-bedroom suite, the pressure of impending federal prison sentences finally shattered their united front. I was sitting in my newly reclaimed corner office sipping a black coffee when Marcus walked in and turned on the wall-mounted television. He did not say a word. He just pointed to the local news broadcast. There, standing on the concrete steps of the federal courthouse, was my mother. Catherine Winston looked entirely unrecognizable. The custom designer gowns and heavy diamond jewelry were gone. She wore a plain beige cardigan and a modest gray skirt. She wore absolutely no makeup, her hair pulled back into a severe, sensible clasp. She clutched a crumpled tissue, her shoulders slumped in a posture of utter defeat. She was playing her new role to absolute perfection. My husband Thomas was a domineering, financially abusive man. Catherine wept for the rolling news cameras dabbing at her dry eyes. I was a traditional sheltered wife. He handled every single aspect of our finances. He kept me entirely in the dark. I had absolutely no idea about the private shadow loans, and I am horrified to learn about the embezzlement from the country club pension fund. I am cooperating fully with the federal authorities to ensure justice is served. I watched the broadcast with a cold, clinical detachment. Catherine was publicly throwing the man she had been married to for 35 years directly under the federal bus. She was desperately trying to spin a narrative of a battered, clueless housewife to save herself from a 10-year sentence for financial conspiracy. She was willing to ensure Thomas died in a federal penitentiary if it meant she could avoid wearing an orange jumpsuit. She just handed the prosecution their star witness, Marcus noted, shaking his head in disgust. Thomas has absolutely zero defense now. His own wife just corroborated the embezzlement. But Catherine was not the only Winston desperately trying to sacrifice someone else to save her own skin. Later that afternoon, my secure line rang. It was Special Agent Miller from the Cybercrime Division. His voice carried a tone of profound irritation mixed with professional obligation. "Paige, we have a situation in the interrogation room," Agent Miller stated bluntly. "Brittany is officially refusing to confess to the cyber attack. In fact, she is actively trying to pin the entire federal breach on a third party. She is accusing her husband." I gripped the edge of my mahogany desk. The sheer audacity of her lie was staggering. "What exactly is her story?" "She is playing the technologically illiterate socialite," Miller explained. "She claims she does not even know what a proxy server or an IP address is. She told us Derek is a brilliant tech chief executive officer who holds a deep personal grudge against you and your family. She swore under penalty of perjury that Derek took her rose gold iPad while she was sleeping, bypassed your security protocols, and framed her to secure a favorable divorce settlement." My blood boiled. Brittany was facing a mandatory minimum sentence under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. To escape it, she was perfectly willing to frame the only decent man who had ever entered our family orbit, attempting to destroy his life, his freedom, and his software company in one malicious strike. "Are you actually entertaining this absurd theory?" I demanded. "We are federal agents, Paige. We have to follow up on every sworn statement," Miller replied, sounding exhausted. "We are preparing a subpoena for Derek now. We have to bring him in for formal questioning." I hung up the phone, immediately opening my secure laptop to see if I could extract any further metadata to definitively clear Derek's name. But before my fingers even touched the keyboard, the situation resolved itself in the most spectacular, calculated manner possible. Derek did not wait for the federal agents to knock on his door. He did not hire a high-priced corporate defense team to shield him from the investigation. He drove himself directly to the federal precinct in downtown Manhattan. Agent Miller called me back 2 hours later, his tone entirely transformed. He sounded almost amused. "You do not need to worry about Derek," Miller said. "He just walked into the lobby, bypassed the front desk, and handed the lead investigator a heavily encrypted USB drive." "What was on it?" I asked. "Derek is a software engineer who builds heavily guarded tech platforms," Miller explained. "He recently installed a state-of-the-art motion-activated smart home security system in his personal office to monitor his proprietary servers. The cameras capture high-resolution video and audio, and they automatically back up to a cloud drive he controls." I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. "The footage on that drive is pristine," Miller continued. "It is time-stamped for 9 in the morning, the exact minute the cyber attack on your firm commenced. The video clearly shows Brittany sitting alone at Derek's desk. She is drinking a mimosa, laughing out loud, and aggressively typing on her rose gold iPad. At one point, she actually boasts to herself on the audio recording about how easy it was to access your credentials. Derek just handed us an airtight high-definition confession. Brittany's desperate, malicious alibi was completely atomized. She had tried to frame her husband as a criminal mastermind, and he had effortlessly retaliated with absolute undeniable digital proof of her guilt. But Derek was not quite finished. Before he left the precinct, Miller added, "Derek handed my lead investigator a thick manila envelope. He requested that we deliver it to Brittany in the interrogation room since he legally cannot contact her due to the ongoing investigation." "What was in the envelope?" I asked. Miller chuckled. "He served her with divorce papers. He had the federal agents hand deliver them while she was sitting in handcuffs." I closed my laptop and looked out the window at the sprawling city skyline. The Winston family had spent their entire lives treating people like disposable assets, manipulating the truth and destroying anyone who stood in their way. Now, locked in a cheap hotel room and federal holding cells, they were finally experiencing the terrifying reality of their own actions. They had turned on each other like starving animals, only to find that the traps they set for others had snapped shut entirely on themselves. The 48-hour deadline established by the shadow lenders expired at exactly noon on Friday. Thomas and Catherine had risked violating their bail conditions by sneaking away from their cheap airport hotel and driving back to the Winston estate. They were desperate. They believed they could quickly strip the mansion of any remaining untraceable valuables, loose diamonds, hidden cash, and small antiquities that the federal agents had overlooked during the raid. They were frantically tearing through the master suite walk-in closets when the heavy oak front doors of the mansion were violently kicked open. The private lending syndicate did not operate like a highly regulated commercial bank. They did not serve formal eviction notices via registered mail, and they did not send polite property managers to change the locks. They sent a specialized, highly aggressive physical recovery team. 6 men built like linebackers wearing dark, unmarked suits flooded into the grand foyer. Thomas tried to puff out his chest and demand they leave his property. The lead enforcer did not even break his stride. He grabbed my father by the lapels of his wrinkled shirt and physically hurled him backward into the hallway wall. Catherine shrieked as 2 other men grabbed her by the arms, completely ignoring her demands to call the police. The enforcers dragged my parents down the sweeping marble staircase and physically threw them out the front door. Their hastily packed duffel bags were tossed onto the damp grass right beside them. Heavy steel chains were instantly wrapped around the brass door handles. The ultimate symbol of the Winston family dynasty was locked down and seized in under 3 minutes. I was sitting at my office desk finalizing the legal transfer of my grandfather's trust when my personal cell phone began to vibrate violently. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times before I calmly pressed the accept button. For the first time in my entire 34 years of existence, Catherine was not using her practiced, manipulative, aristocratic tone. She was not issuing threats, and she was not playing the role of a victimized socialite for an audience. She was hyperventilating. She was sobbing with a raw, ugly, authentic terror that stripped away every ounce of her artificial pride. "Paige!" Catherine gasped, her breath catching in her throat. "You have to help us. They threw us out on the lawn. They chained the doors. We have absolutely nothing left. The bank accounts are frozen, the credit cards are declined, and Thomas's lawyer dropped him. We are going to be sleeping on the street." I listened to the sound of passing cars in the background of her call. I could picture her standing on the sidewalk, staring at the mansion she had used to belittle everyone around her. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Catherine?" I asked, my voice completely devoid of any emotional inflection. "Buy the house," she pleaded, her voice cracking into a pathetic whine. "You have the trust money now. You have billions. Pay off these monsters. Settle the debt so we can go back inside. We will do whatever you want, Paige. We will sign whatever you need. Just please do not let me become homeless." The absolute desperation in her voice was a testament to how completely their reality had shattered. She was begging the daughter she had treated like garbage, the daughter her husband had just tried to frame and extort, to be their financial savior. "I will handle the lenders," I stated simply, and ended the call. I did not call the police, and I did not wire a single cent to my parents. I opened my encrypted database and ran a rapid forensic trace on the Shadow Syndicate. They operated under a heavily shielded shell corporation named Apex Capital Solutions. I found the direct contact number for their managing director, a man named Victor, and requested an immediate face-to-face meeting. When dealing with predatory lenders, you never negotiate from a position of defense. You buy the leverage. 2 hours later, I walked into the private dining room of an exclusive discreet steakhouse in the financial district. Victor was already seated at the table. He was a sharply dressed, deeply intimidating man who radiated an aura of quiet danger. He looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and calculation, clearly expecting a weeping, panicked daughter arriving to write a massive rescue check to save her family's honor. He heavily underestimated my agenda. I did not sit down. I dropped a heavy, pristine legal folder directly onto the center of the table. Miss Winston, Victor said smoothly, gesturing to the folder. "I assume you are here to clear your father's outstanding $5 million balance. We appreciate prompt settlements, especially from family members who value their privacy." I looked him dead in the eye. "I am not here to clear a single cent of Thomas Winston's debt." Victor frowned, the polite facade instantly dropping. "Then why are you wasting my time? The estate belongs to us now. You hold a toxic, high-risk, collateralized loan connected to a man currently facing a 20-year federal prison sentence for pension embezzlement," I explained, keeping my tone razor-sharp. "The moment the federal prosecutors realize that mansion was used to secure an unregulated loan, they will freeze the property as a byproduct of a criminal enterprise. Your syndicate will be dragged into a multi-year federal asset forfeiture battle. You will lose millions in legal fees, and you might lose the house entirely to the government." Victor did not move. He knew my forensic analysis was flawlessly accurate. "I am not here to pay off my parents' debt," I stated, tapping the heavy folder on the table. "I am here to buy the paper. I am offering to purchase the entire debt portfolio, including the deed to the estate, directly from Apex Capital Solutions. I will pay you $5.5 million in clean, untraceable, instantly verified corporate funds. You walk away with a guaranteed immediate $500,000 profit, and you completely avoid the impending federal crosshairs." Victor stared at me in profound silence. He slowly reached out and pulled the folder toward him, reviewing the ironclad financial transfer documents I had already prepared. A dark, deeply impressed smile spread across his face. "You are not saving them at all," Victor murmured, a tone of absolute respect entering his voice. "You are making yourself their sole absolute creditor. You want to hold the leash." "I will execute the wire transfer the moment you sign over the deed," I replied coldly. I did not want to save my parents from the streets. I wanted to become the singular, undisputed owner of the Winston estate, and I wanted to be the one who officially legally evicted them from my property. The wire transfer took less than 10 minutes to clear. Victor sat across from me, watching his tablet screen until the confirmation notification illuminated his face. He nodded once, a gesture of profound professional respect, and slid the heavy leather folio across the polished oak table. Inside were the original promissory notes, the shadow contracts Thomas had desperately signed, and the physical deed to the Winston estate. I did not just pay off a debt. I had legally purchased the entire portfolio at a highly favorable discount. The syndicate walked away with a clean $500,000 profit and zero federal exposure. I walked out of the financial district steakhouse holding the absolute, undeniable ownership of my family's legacy in a single manila envelope. I was officially the sole lien holder of the property. The ultimate symbol of their wealth, their superiority, and their psychological warfare now belonged entirely to the daughter they had treated like a disposable asset. I drove back to the estate, pulling through the open iron gates. Victor had been true to his word. A quick phone call from him had commanded his recovery team to remove the heavy steel chains from the front doors and vacate the premises. The driveway was empty save for Thomas's leased sedan. I stepped through the heavy mahogany front doors without knocking. The grand foyer, which had been the site of a violent physical eviction just hours earlier, was now bustling with frantic, relieved energy. Thomas and Catherine were dragging their hastily packed duffel bags back inside from the lawn. Catherine was already barking orders at a confused housekeeper who had returned to the property demanding she immediately press Thomas's suits and draw a hot bath. They honestly believed they had won. They thought my presence in the syndicate's office meant I had blindly surrendered to their emotional extortion and simply wired the money to wipe their slate clean. The moment Catherine spotted me walking into the foyer, she let out a loud theatrical sigh of relief. She dropped a leather travel bag and rushed toward me, her face arranged in a mask of artificial maternal gratitude. "I knew you would do the right thing," Paige Catherine said, her voice dripping with that familiar condescending sweetness. "I knew you would not let your own parents be thrown onto the street like common criminals. We will have the lawyers draft a repayment schedule for you next week. Now please tell me those thugs are gone permanently." Thomas stood behind her, adjusting his collar, his arrogant posture already returning. "You cut it awfully close, Paige," he reprimanded, as if I were a subordinate who had missed a filing deadline. "You should have executed the transfer yesterday and saved your mother the trauma of dealing with those animals." I stood perfectly still on the marble floor. I did not return Catherine's attempted embrace. I simply opened the manila envelope I was carrying and extracted a single heavily stamped legal document. "I did not pay off your debt, Thomas," I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the massive foyer. Thomas froze, his hands dropping from his collar. "What are you talking about? The chains are gone. The men left." "I bought the debt," I clarified, stepping forward and pressing the document directly against his chest. "I did not give the syndicate $5 million on your behalf. I purchased your entire liability portfolio, including the collateralized deed to this property. I am your new lender. I am the sole lien holder of the Winston estate. And since you are currently in catastrophic default of the original loan terms, I am formally foreclosing on the property." The color instantly drained from Catherine's face. She looked at the paper in Thomas's trembling hands. It was not a receipt. It was a formal, legally binding 30-day eviction notice. "You have exactly 1 month to vacate my property?" I continued, my tone clinical and relentless. "You can spend that time packing your belongings, or you can spend it searching for a criminal defense attorney for your impending pension embezzlement trial. But on the 31st day, if you are still inside this house, I will not send shadow enforcers to throw your bags on the lawn. I will send the county sheriff." The absolute crushing reality of the situation crashed down on them. The relief that had animated them just seconds ago evaporated into a suffocating, terrified silence. I had not saved them. I had masterfully trapped them legally, severing their last remaining tie to the elite world they worshipped. "You ungrateful, malicious little bitch," Thomas hissed, his voice vibrating with a sudden explosive rage. His pride already fractured by the federal raid, and the physical humiliation by the syndicate completely shattered. His face turned a dangerous mottled crimson. He lunged forward, completely losing control. He raised his heavy right hand, pulling his arm back to strike me across the face. I did not flinch. I did not even blink. Before Thomas's hand could begin its downward arc, a tall figure stepped out from the shadows of the hallway directly behind me. Derek moved with a sudden protective velocity. He intercepted Thomas's arm mid-air, his grip locking around my father's wrist like a steel vise. With a violent, authoritative shove, Derek forced Thomas backward, sending the older man stumbling over a duffel bag and crashing hard against the marble floor. "You don't touch her," Derek warned, his voice a low, lethal growl that commanded the entire room. "Start packing." Thomas stared at Derek, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched in his cheek. He did not take another step forward. The sheer physical presence of his son-in-law, combined with the crushing reality of the formal eviction notice I had just pressed into his chest, finally broke the last remaining pillar of his tyrannical facade. He slowly lowered his raised hand, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his total defeat, and turned away without another word. Catherine was already on her knees on the cold marble floor, weeping hysterically into her hands. I did not offer a single word of comfort. I simply turned on my heel and walked out the front door, leaving Derek to monitor their packing. 3 days passed. The Winston family's collapse was swift and absolute, dominating the local financial news cycles. But cornered animals are the most dangerous, and my sister Brittany had spent her entire life perfecting the art of emotional manipulation. I was in my office on Thursday morning, methodically reviewing the preliminary documents for the country club pension restitution, when my private line rang. It was Derek. When I answered, the strong, authoritative man who had physically restrained my father sounded completely shattered. His voice was hollow, trembling, with a heavy, suffocating guilt. "Paige," he said, exhaling a ragged breath. "I do not know what to do. Brittany just came to my hotel. She is pregnant." I stopped typing. The silence on the line was thick and heavy. "She brought an ultrasound printout." Derek continued, his voice breaking. "She was crying hysterically. She said she knows she made horrific mistakes, but she begged me not to abandon our unborn child. She said she is facing federal prison and a hostile divorce, and the extreme stress is going to cause a miscarriage. Paige, I cannot leave my own child. I cannot let my baby be born behind bars. I might have to pull the divorce papers and pay for her federal defense team." Before I could respond, my office phone flashed with a new voicemail notification. I put Derek on speaker and played the message. It was Brittany. Her voice was breathy, fragile, and dripping with manufactured innocence. "Paige, please," Brittany sobbed through the speaker. "I know you hate me. I know I deserve it. But I am carrying Derek's baby. I have absolutely nothing left. My accounts are frozen by the FBI. I cannot even afford prenatal vitamins or a safe place to sleep. Please, as an aunt, I am begging you for a trust advance. Just $100,000 for the baby. Do not punish an innocent child for my sins." Derek let out a heavy sigh over the phone. "You see what I mean, Paige? She is completely broken." I listened to the voicemail a second time. My professional instincts immediately drowned out any trace of familial sympathy. Brittany was a woman who had never shown an ounce of maternal instinct in her entire life. She was a woman currently facing a mandatory minimum federal sentence for cyber espionage and wire fraud. A sudden, perfectly timed pregnancy that magically guaranteed her husband's financial support and manipulated my trust fund was not a miracle. It was a calculated, desperate, tactical deployment. "Derek," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, "do not drop those divorce papers and do not transfer a single dollar to her legal team. Give me 2 hours." I hung up the phone and opened my forensic accounting software. Brittany's primary bank accounts and credit cards had been frozen by the federal government, but I knew she still had access to a joint checking account she shared with Derek for minor household expenses. Since I was officially managing Derek's asset separation for the divorce, I immediately accessed the shared financial portal. If Brittany had truly discovered she was pregnant, there would be a definitive digital paper trail. A wealthy socialite like my sister did not simply purchase a plastic test from a local pharmacy and accept the result. She would have immediately booked a premium appointment at a luxury Manhattan obstetrician. There would be a copay, a specialized blood test fee, or a private consultation charge. I meticulously audited the last 14 days of her transaction history. I scoured every single line item. There were charges for premium coffee, a frantic purchase at a discount clothing retailer, and an overpriced rideshare to Derek's hotel. There was absolutely zero record of a medical facility, a pharmacy, or a doctor's office. But there was one glaring anomaly. 4 days ago, precisely 24 hours after Derek had served her with divorce papers in the federal interrogation room, a charge appeared for $49.99. The merchant descriptor was simply listed as J&J Novelties Incorporated. I pulled the merchant identification number and ran it through a corporate registry database. The parent company was registered in Delaware, operating a series of e-commerce storefronts. I clicked through the active links associated with the business license. The primary website loaded on my screen. It was a gag gift retailer specializing in highly realistic, customizable prank items. Right on their homepage, listed as a weekly bestseller, was a product titled Premium Prank Ultrasound. The description boasted high-quality thermal paper, personalized patient names, and customized gestational dates, guaranteed to fool any partner. The price was exactly $49.99. I felt a cold, sharp spike of absolute disgust. Brittany had not just lied, she had weaponized the concept of motherhood. She had actively purchased a forged medical document from a joke website to inflict severe psychological trauma on her husband, exploiting his fundamental decency to extort legal protection and financial support. I downloaded the transaction log, captured high-resolution screenshots of the novelty website, and printed the entire digital trail. I called Derek and told him to come to my office immediately. He arrived 30 minutes later looking exhausted, carrying the weight of a moral dilemma he did not deserve. He sat down across from my desk, rubbing his temples, already preparing a speech about his responsibilities as a father and his duty to protect his unborn child. I did not let him speak. I slid the printed transaction log and the glossy screenshot of the gag gift website across the mahogany desk. "Read it," I commanded. Derek frowned, picking up the papers. His eyes scanned the highlighted $49 charge. He looked at the brightly colored screenshot of the fake ultrasound generator. He read the product description. He looked down at the transaction date, realizing it perfectly matched the exact day after he served her the divorce papers. The air vanished from the room. I watched the heavy, suffocating guilt completely drain from Derek's face. The conflict and the agony in his eyes were instantly replaced by a cold, hardened realization. The final fragile illusion he held about his wife shattered into dust. He realized he was not dealing with a flawed woman making mistakes under pressure. He was dealing with a remorseless sociopath. "She bought it online," Derek whispered, his voice dangerously quiet. "She looked me in the eye and cried over a piece of prank paper." "She is not pregnant, Derek," I said softly. "She is just out of options." She played her final manipulative card, and it was a complete fraud. Derek slowly set the papers down on my desk. He took a deep, steadying breath, his posture straightening as the emotional manipulation entirely lost its grip on his mind. He pulled out his cell phone, permanently blocked Brittany's number, and sent a single brief message to his attorney to expedite the divorce proceedings to the maximum legal extent. He looked up at me, his expression resolute and completely unbothered. "She is going to federal prison," he said, his tone devoid of any remaining pity. "And she is going entirely alone." Derek, walking out of my office and permanently severing his ties to the Winston family, was the final devastating blow to their collapsing empire. Without Derek's substantial tech fortune to fund their legal defense, and without his pristine corporate reputation to hide behind, my family was left entirely exposed to the federal government and to me. Brittany was completely isolated, left to face the FBI investigators, with nothing but a gag gift receipt sitting in a federal evidence locker. Thomas and Catherine were staring down a 30-day eviction clock with absolutely zero liquid assets and the terrifying shadow of a pension embezzlement trial hanging over their heads, facing total financial and legal annihilation. Thomas's civil attorneys waved the white flag. They frantically contacted Marcus, begging for a global mediation. They wanted to settle the civil suits, resolve the trust disputes, and negotiate a stay on the foreclosure and eviction before the criminal charges completely swallowed them whole. I agreed to the meeting, not out of any lingering sense of familial mercy, but because I wanted to deliver the final strike in a highly controlled, legally binding environment. The mediation took place the following Tuesday on the 42nd floor of a prestigious corporate law firm in Midtown Manhattan. The conference room was vast and sterile, encased in floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a sweeping view of the city they used to believe they ruled. I sat on one side of the long mahogany table with Marcus, my posture relaxed, my files neatly organized in a single leather briefcase. Thomas and Catherine sat across from us, flanked by two exhausted-looking attorneys. My parents looked remarkably aged. The stress of the past week had carved deep lines into Thomas's face, and his expensive suit hung loosely on his frame. Catherine sat rigidly, her eyes darting nervously around the room, clutching a linen handkerchief. Sitting at the head of the table was Judge Harrison, a highly respected retired appellate judge hired to mediate the bloodbath. Judge Harrison opened the floor, and Thomas's lead attorney immediately launched into a desperate plea for clemency. He requested a 6-month stay on the mansion eviction and a modest, heavily monitored monthly stipend from my grandfather's trust. He argued that throwing a socially prominent elderly couple onto the street during a pending federal investigation was a disproportionate and cruel punishment. Before Marcus could issue our categorical denial, Thomas held up his hand, silencing his own lawyer. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the mahogany table, and turned his gaze toward Judge Harrison. He was about to deliver the performance of his lifetime. "Your Honor." Thomas began, his voice thick with manufactured emotion and carefully calibrated regret. "I am a flawed man. I made a terrible, foolish mistake. I was drowning in debt, terrified of losing the home my wife and I built, and I panicked. I sent my daughter a desperate text message making an empty, hollow threat because I knew she had the financial means to save us. I was wrong." Thomas paused, letting out a ragged sigh, playing the role of the broken, misunderstood patriarch to absolute perfection. "But look at what she has done in response." Thomas continued, his voice rising with a pitch of righteous indignation as he pointed a trembling finger at me. "She did not just say no. She bought the debt to intentionally foreclose on her childhood home. She initiated a campaign of total sociopathic destruction against her own flesh and blood. She is a ruthless, ungrateful child who is entirely willing to destroy her family to leave her mother homeless and destitute over one small panicked text message." Catherine immediately chimed in, perfectly on cue. She pressed the handkerchief to her dry eyes, letting out a soft, theatrical sob. "We gave her everything," Catherine whispered to the judge, her voice shaking. "We raised her in absolute luxury. We provided her with the best education money could buy. And the second she gained access to her grandfather's wealth, she turned into a monster. She is punishing us for simply asking for help." Judge Harrison folded his hands, his expression softening slightly as he looked at my parents. He was a man accustomed to messy family disputes, and Thomas had expertly painted a picture of a harsh, disproportionate retaliation. The judge turned his gaze to me, clearly expecting me to either aggressively defend my actions or display some shred of remorse for my heavy-handed tactics. I did not break eye contact with my father. I did not raise my voice, and I did not offer a single word of defense. I calmly reached down and unclasped the brass locks on my leather briefcase. "You honestly believe this is about a text message?" I said, my voice dropping into a deadly quiet register that instantly froze the air in the conference room. "You think I bought your debt and seized your estate because you tried to extort me for $5 million? I pulled a thick, heavily bound stack of documents from the briefcase and placed it squarely in the center of the mahogany table. "It was never about the text message, Thomas," I stated coldly. "It was about this." Judge Harrison frowned, leaning forward to look at the stack of papers. Thomas and Catherine stared at the documents, a sudden, genuine flicker of panic replacing their manufactured grief. 5 years ago, I addressed the mediator, keeping my eyes locked on my father. I was on the fast track to becoming the youngest senior partner at a top-tier corporate accounting firm in this city. I was entirely financially independent, building a stellar reputation, and completely free from my family's influence. Then, out of nowhere, I was abruptly terminated. The firm cited vague performance issues that made absolutely no sense. For months, I was inexplicably blacklisted. Every major firm in the financial district suddenly rejected my applications. I nearly lost my apartment. I questioned my own sanity and my professional competence. I was forced to drain my meager savings just to survive. I slid the top folder across the table, pushing it directly in front of Judge Harrison. "Those are offshore wire transfer receipts," I explained, my tone surgical and relentless. "They detail a series of massive, untraceable payments made from a shell corporation controlled by Thomas Winston directly to the senior managing partners of my former firm. He bribed them to fire me." Catherine let out a sharp gasp, her hand dropping from her face. "And beneath those receipts," I continued, pushing, A second folder forward are copies of emails and private correspondence my mother sent to board members and hiring managers across the financial district. She fabricated horrific detailed rumors about my mental stability and alleged substance abuse to ensure no other firm would even grant me an interview. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table, watching the color completely drain from my parents' faces, as their ultimate unforgivable betrayal was laid bare in front of their own legal counsel. "You did not make a single panicked mistake last week," I told them, my voice vibrating with absolute authority. "You orchestrated a deliberate, highly funded conspiracy to destroy my career and shatter my livelihood 5 years ago. You tried to break my independence to force me to come crawling back to your mansion to keep me entirely dependent on your wealth so you could control my life forever. You sabotaged my existence long before you ever tried to extort me." I sat back in my leather chair looking at the stunned mediator and the horrified defense attorneys. "I am not destroying my family over a text message," I concluded. "I am executing a 5-year overdue eviction. My offer for a settlement is 0. Pack your bags." Judge Harrison picked up the top folder, adjusting his reading glasses as his eyes scanned the highlighted sections of the wire transfer logs and the printed email threads. The silence in the glass-enclosed conference room was absolute, broken only by the sharp rustle of paper as the mediator flipped the pages. I watched the color drain completely from the faces of Thomas's defense attorneys. They leaned over, reading the documents upside down, realizing instantly that their clients had brazenly lied to them about the extent of their criminal liability. Judge Harrison read aloud from an email dated 5 years prior. It was sent directly from Thomas's private server to the senior managing partner of my former accounting firm. The text was blunt, malicious, and entirely transactional. "Terminate Paige's employment immediately and ensure no other Tier 1 firm picks up her contract." The judge read, his voice vibrating with disbelief. "In exchange, the entire Oak Ridge Elite Country Club corporate account, along with the Winston family's private portfolio, will be routed exclusively to your firm. She needs to fail in the real world, so she is forced to come back and manage my internal ledgers." The horrifying reality of the situation settled heavily over the mahogany table. Thomas had not just wanted to control me. He had desperately needed a brilliant captive forensic accountant to actively manage and hide his massive ongoing pension embezzlement scheme at the country club. He needed someone smart enough to fix his failing firm and loyal enough to go down with the ship. When I had refused to work for him after graduation, he had systematically destroyed my career to starve me into submission. Judge Harrison slowly closed the folder and took off his glasses. He looked at Thomas with an expression of profound, unfiltered disgust. "In my 30 years on the bench," Judge Harrison stated, his voice tight with professional revulsion, "I have presided over cartel leaders and organized crime syndicates who treated their own blood with more dignity than you have shown your daughter. You do not have a defense. You have a detailed, irrefutable confession." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. Marcus opened his second briefcase and distributed 3 thick legal binders, sliding one to Thomas, one to Catherine, and one down to the far end of the table where Brittany sat. My sister had been completely silent for the entire mediation, staring blankly at the polished wood, looking utterly hollowed out by her impending divorce and federal cyber espionage charges. "We are skipping the negotiation phase," I announced, addressing the defense attorneys directly. "You have seen the financial records. You know the FBI possesses the J&J Novelties gag gift receipt and the high-definition security footage of Brittany hacking my firm. You know the federal prosecutors are currently building an airtight RICO case against Thomas for pension fraud. You have absolutely zero leverage, zero funds, and zero chance of winning a jury trial." I pointed to the heavy binders in front of them. "Inside are my final non-negotiable terms," I stated smoothly. "First, you will sign a comprehensive, irrevocable waiver explicitly surrendering any and all claims to my grandfather's trust. You will never see a single cent of that money. Second, you will sign the quitclaim deed transferring the Winston estate entirely to me, and you will vacate the premises by 5 o'clock tomorrow evening." Catherine let out a quiet, pathetic whimper, burying her face in her trembling hands. She knew it was over. The illusion of her wealthy, untouchable existence had permanently shattered. Third, I continued my gaze locking onto my father. You will contact the United States Attorney's Office tomorrow morning and formally plead guilty to all federal charges. You will not fight the indictment. You will not drag this through a public trial to delay your sentencing. You will accept the prison time. Thomas's lead attorney wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. And what exactly does my client get in exchange for complete capitulation? If you sign those documents and accept the federal plea deals? I replied, my voice dropping to a harsh, absolute whisper. I will not pursue civil litigation. I will not sue you into oblivion for 5 years of lost wages, corporate defamation, and extreme emotional distress. I will not personally ensure that you owe me every single dollar you make in the prison commissary for the rest of your natural lives. I will take the house, keep my trust, and let the federal government handle your punishment. The sheer weight of the absolute defeat hung in the air. Thomas was trapped. He was financially ruined, legally cornered, and entirely at my mercy. But Thomas was constitutionally incapable of accepting defeat. His massive, fragile ego could not process the reality of surrendering his entire empire to the daughter he had spent 34 years trying to crush. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered venom. He slammed his heavy fist onto the glass table so hard the coffee cups rattled, startling the mediator and his own lawyers. I will never sign my property over to a bastard mistake, Thomas roared, his voice echoing violently off the glass walls. I built this family. I am the patriarch of the Winston dynasty. I would rather rot in a cell than surrender to you. The defense attorneys instantly started to panic, trying to physically pull Thomas back into his chair, whispering frantically about the severity of the evidence and the danger of his outburst. But the Winston family alliance had already completely fractured. The heavy, volatile silence that followed Thomas's screaming was suddenly broken by the sharp click of a ballpoint pen. Everyone at the table turned their heads. Brittany, who had spent her entire life hiding behind her father's authority and bullying me with Catherine's blessing, slowly reached across the mahogany table. Her hands were trembling violently, her knuckles white. She looked at her father's red, furious face, and then she looked down at the overwhelming stack of federal evidence that guaranteed her destruction. She broke ranks, completely abandoning her family's toxic loyalty, and grabbed the pen. Brittany gripped the heavy silver pen so tightly her knuckles turned a sharp, translucent white. The click of the pen echoed through the glass-enclosed conference room like a gunshot. Thomas whipped his head toward his youngest daughter, his face contorting into a mask of absolute disbelief. "What are you doing?" he barked, his voice cracking with panic. "Put that pen down immediately. We do not surrender to her." Brittany did not even look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on the thick legal binder sitting in front of her. She flipped to the signature page of the trust waiver. "You have absolutely no leverage, Dad," Brittany said, her voice dripping with a cold, pragmatic detachment that mirrored the very tactics Thomas had taught her. "You are broke. Derek froze my accounts and is pushing for an expedited divorce. I am staring down federal cyber espionage charges because I hacked Paige's firm on your direct orders. I am not spending the best years of my life in a federal penitentiary just to protect your fragile ego." Brittany pressed the pen to the paper. She signed her name with swift, aggressive strokes, formally surrendering her entire stake in our grandfather's trust, relinquishing any claim to the Winston estate, and officially agreeing to cooperate with the federal prosecutors. She pushed the signed binder across the mahogany table toward Marcus, completely severing her ties to the sinking ship of the Winston dynasty. Thomas gasped, stumbling back into his leather chair, as if he had been physically struck. His chest heaved as he struggled to process the magnitude of the betrayal. His golden child, the daughter he had molded into a weapon against me, had just flawlessly executed him to save herself. He turned his desperate, bloodshot eyes toward his wife. Catherine, Thomas pleaded, reaching out a trembling hand across the table. "Tell her. Tell this ungrateful, traitorous girl that we stand together. We are the Winston family. We do not capitulate." Catherine sat perfectly still. She looked at her husband's outstretched hand, and then she slowly raised her gaze to his face. She did not see the powerful, untouchable patriarch who had commanded boardrooms and terrified country club executives. She saw a broken, destitute, humiliated old man who had just lost his entire empire. Catherine was a woman built entirely on social preservation. She had married Thomas for his wealth, his status, and the armor his reputation provided. With all of that stripped away, there was absolutely nothing left holding her to him. She turned her head and looked directly at me. "If I sign these documents," Catherine asked, her voice eerily calm, "you guarantee that you will drop the civil defamation suits against me. You guarantee that you will not come after my personal pre-existing jewelry collections or attempt to garnish my future social security." I held her gaze, my expression completely unreadable. "You sign the deed, you waive the trust, and you accept the federal plea deal," I confirmed coldly. "If you do that, I will not pursue you in civil court. I will leave you exactly as you are right now, destitute but free from my personal litigation." Catherine did not hesitate. She did not look back at Thomas. She reached for the pen Brittany had abandoned, pulled her binder forward, and began signing the pages. "Catherine, no." Thomas choked out his voice, dropping to a pathetic, ragged whisper. "After 30 years. You are going to betray me after 30 years." Catherine finished her final signature and neatly closed the binder. 30 years of luxury and security. "Thomas," she replied, her tone as hard and brittle as a diamond, "I am not spending my golden years in a concrete cell because you were too arrogant to cover your tracks at the country club. You lost. I am simply surviving." Thomas was left entirely alone. He looked around the massive, sterile conference room. Judge Harrison watched him with clinical, silent detachment. His own defense attorneys were staring at their laptops, already mentally calculating how to extract themselves from this catastrophic failure. His wife and his favorite daughter sat silently, having legally executed his empire to save their own skin. He had no leverage. He had no allies. He had no money. The psychological collapse of a narcissist is not a quiet event. It is a total, visible implosion. Thomas's shoulders collapsed inward, his spine bowing under the crushing weight of his absolute defeat. The color faded from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. He stared at me across the table, his eyes wide and vacant, stripped of all the power, wealth, and terrifying authority he had wielded over me for my entire existence. He reached out with a violently shaking hand. He picked up the pen. He could barely hold it steady enough to form the letters. With a jagged, unsteady script, Thomas signed his name on the final page of the foreclosure agreement, the trust waiver, and the federal confession. He pushed the binder toward the center of the table and buried his face in his hands. Marcus calmly reached forward, collected the 3 binders, and locked them securely inside his briefcase. I stood up, smoothing the front of my blazer. "Thank you for your time, Judge Harrison," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the silent room. The mediator simply nodded, gathering his own files. "The mediation is officially concluded." I turned and walked out of the conference room, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Thomas, Catherine, and Brittany slowly trailed behind me, shuffling through the glass doors like prisoners walking to the gallows. They did not speak to each other. They kept their distance, completely fractured and broken. We walked down the long, carpeted hallway toward the main elevator bank of the law firm. I pressed the down button and stood back, waiting for the heavy brass doors to open. Thomas was staring blankly at the floor. Catherine was dabbing her eyes with her linen handkerchief. A soft chime signaled the arrival of the elevator. The brass doors slid open. The elevator car was not empty. 4 men in dark suits and windbreakers bearing the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation stood inside, waiting. A lead agent stepped forward, his eyes scanning the group before locking onto my father. "Thomas Winston, Catherine Winston, and Brittany Winston," the agent stated, his voice booming in the quiet hallway. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, pension embezzlement, and cyber espionage." Thomas snapped his head toward me, his eyes widening in pure terror. "You promised," he gasped, his voice trembling. "You promised you would not destroy us." I looked at him with an expression of absolute chilling indifference. "I promised I would not sue you in civil court," I corrected him, stepping aside as the federal agents moved forward with handcuffs. I specifically demanded you sign a federal confession. Did you honestly think the Department of Justice was going to wait for you to turn yourselves in? I watched as the cold steel cuffs locked around Thomas's wrists. The Empire was officially dead. The federal magistrate had granted Thomas, Catherine, and Brittany temporary bail pending their formal sentencing hearings. They were stripped of their passports, their remaining bank accounts were heavily monitored, and their movements were restricted by thick GPS ankle monitors. The criminal justice system moved at its own bureaucratic pace. My foreclosure clock did not. The exact 30 days expired at 8 o'clock on a brisk Friday morning. I stood on the pristine, manicured front lawn of the Winston estate, wearing a tailored charcoal power suit, holding a steaming cup of coffee. A pair of rusted, heavily dented moving trucks were parked haphazardly on the circular driveway. There were no white-gloved estate packers to carefully wrap their possessions. There were no luxury concierge movers. My parents could not afford them. They were forced to pack and load the trucks themselves. I watched in absolute silence as the Empire was physically dismantled. Thomas was sweating profusely through a faded polo shirt, awkwardly struggling to carry a generic cardboard box taped together with cheap packaging tape. His face was a canvas of pure humiliation. The man who used to terrorize country club executives and manipulate financial markets was now panting heavily as he hoisted a box of kitchen utensils into the back of a rented truck. He did not look at me. He kept his eyes glued to the pavement, completely broken by the reality of his downfall. Brittany dragged 2 heavy black garbage bags down the sweeping marble front steps. Her designer luggage and luxury handbags had been seized by the FBI as assets acquired through federal wire fraud. She was reduced to transporting her remaining unbranded clothing in plastic trash bags. She kept her head down, her face obscured by a pair of oversized sunglasses, moving with the sluggish, defeated energy of a woman who knew she was trading a mansion for a federal penitentiary. Catherine emerged from the heavy mahogany front doors a few moments later. She was carrying a small, poorly taped box containing a few framed photographs and whatever meager personal items the government had allowed her to keep. She stopped halfway down the steps. She looked at the sprawling, gorgeous estate she had ruled for over 3 decades. She looked at the rusted moving trucks, the garbage bags on the driveway, and her sweating, humiliated husband. Finally, she turned her gaze toward me. She marched across the manicured grass, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the cardboard box. She stopped 3 feet away from me. Her face was twisted with a toxic mixture of grief, rage, and a desperate need to inflict one last wound. She realized her money, her status, and her intimidation tactics were completely gone, so she reached for the only weapon she had left. "We gave you life, Paige!" Catherine spat, her voice trembling with venom as she played the ultimate mother card. "We fed you. We housed you. We are your blood. How do you sleep at night knowing you did this to your own family?" I did not flinch. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, savoring the warmth in the crisp morning air. I looked her dead in the eye, my expression completely devoid of any guilt, pity, or hesitation. "Like a baby in a bed paid for with my own money," I replied smoothly. Catherine's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The absolute coldness of my response stripped away her final illusion of control. She realized in that exact second that I was completely impervious to her emotional manipulation. I did not crave her love, and I did not fear her judgment. She had no power here. She turned on her heel and walked away, her shoulders slumped in total defeat. Thomas slammed the back door of the moving truck shut and secured the latch. He walked over to a beat-up 10-year-old rented sedan idling in the driveway. The engine sputtered and whined as Catherine got into the passenger seat and Brittany climbed into the back. They were heading to a cramped, low-income apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city, the only housing they could secure with their ruined credit and pending felony convictions. The sedan slowly pulled down the driveway, the tires crunching against the gravel. They passed through the massive iron gates of the Winston estate for the final time. I watched the car merge onto the main road and disappear from sight. They were gone. A quiet set of footsteps approached from behind me. Derek walked up and stood by my side on the lawn, looking out toward the empty driveway. He was dressed in a sharp navy suit, looking remarkably rested and energized. In his right hand, he held a manila folder containing a single heavily stamped legal document. "It is official," Derek said, his voice ringing with a profound, undeniable relief. The judge expedited the filing based on the federal fraud evidence. The divorce decree is finalized. He held up the folder, a genuine smile breaking across his face. He was completely untethered from Brittany's toxic manipulation and entirely free from the Winston family's chaos. He had protected his own assets, retained his unblemished corporate reputation, and officially severed the dead weight that had been dragging him down. "I am launching the new startup on Monday," Derek continued, turning to look at the massive estate behind us. Clean slate. No shadow investors, no blackmail, and absolutely zero interference. I raised my coffee cup toward him in a silent, respectful toast. True power is not inherited. It is built, protected, and ruthlessly defended against anyone who tries to take it from you. I turned my attention back to the massive, sprawling mansion. The brass door handles gleamed in the morning sun. The sweeping lawns were perfectly manicured. The estate was completely silent, entirely empty, and legally, indisputably mine. I had not just survived my family's psychological warfare. I had dismantled their entire empire, exposing their crimes, seizing their assets, and permanently evicting them from my life. I turned around and walked up the marble steps, stepping through the front doors of my home. 6 months is a remarkably short amount of time to rebuild a ruined reputation, but concrete, irrefutable evidence is a highly effective accelerant. I sat behind the expansive glass desk in my new corner office, overlooking the bustling financial district. The polished brass nameplate outside my door formally recognized my promotion to senior partner. Once the federal indictments against Thomas became public record, the senior managing partners at my former firm who had accepted his bribes were immediately ousted by the board of directors. I had walked into the executive suite with the bribery receipts and quietly negotiated my reinstatement. I demanded full back pay, a substantial promotion, and absolute autonomy over my client roster. They signed the contract without a single argument. The Winston Family Trust, finally free from Thomas's parasitic embezzlement, was flourishing under my direct management. I had aggressively diversified the portfolio, liquidating my father's toxic assets and securing stable long-term growth. For the first time in its history, the money was entirely clean. I was no longer a custodian of their wealth. I was the absolute architect of my own. Justice, I had learned, rarely looks like a dramatic courtroom victory. True justice looks like a Tuesday afternoon at a discount retail store. Brittany was currently serving the first year of her 5-year federal probation. Part of her strict plea agreement required maintaining steady, verifiable minimum wage employment to pay off her court-ordered restitution. She was working the cash register at a fast fashion outlet in a dying suburban mall. I received occasional, highly satisfying updates from the private investigator I kept on retainer. Brittany wore a scratchy, ill-fitting polyester uniform shirt that clashed horribly with her fading highlights. She spent her days under harsh fluorescent lights, scanning clearance tags and snapping bitterly at customers who argued over expired coupons. Her daily humiliation was compounded by her 19-year-old shift manager who regularly reprimanded her for her terrible attitude. Her superficial armor was entirely gone. She was trapped in the exact ordinary working-class life she had spent her entire existence mocking, completely stripped of the Winston name that used to be her shield. Thomas and Catherine fared no better. The federal judge overseeing their pension fraud and wire conspiracy case had shown absolutely zero leniency for their white-collar crimes. In addition to crippling financial penalties and strict house arrest at their tiny low-income apartment, they were sentenced to 2,000 hours of mandatory physical community service. Every Saturday morning at 6 o'clock, the former king and queen of the Oak Ridge Elite Country Club donned bright orange reflective safety vests. They walked along the gravel shoulder of the interstate highway, holding metal grabbers and heavy plastic trash bags. They spent their days picking up fast food wrappers, discarded soda cups and cigarette butts, while heavy semi-trucks roared past them. The physical toll on people who had never worked a day of manual labor in their lives was severe. They spent the entire shift arguing bitterly, hurling toxic insults, and blaming each other for their total annihilation. Their codependency, once a tool they used to manipulate the world, had become their permanent, inescapable prison. They had absolutely nothing left but each other, and the garbage on the side of the road. I did not move back into the Winston estate. The sprawling mansion held too many ghosts, too much oppressive history, and too many reminders of the psychological warfare I had survived. Living there would have felt like wearing a tailored straitjacket. Instead, I repurposed it. I stood in the grand foyer on a bright, crisp morning wearing my signature tailored charcoal power suit. The heavy, suffocating mahogany furniture and the imposing, arrogant oil portraits of my ancestors had been completely stripped away. The space was now flooded with natural light painted in clean, crisp whites and soft blues. The sweeping marble staircase remained, but the rooms branching off the main hall had been entirely transformed. Thomas's dark cigar-scented office was now a free legal clinic. Catherine's opulent receiving room was a modern, state-of-the-art collaborative workspace and classroom. I watched closely as two contractors on a tall aluminum ladder secured a massive brushed steel plaque directly above the main entrance. The polished letters caught the morning sun. It read, "The Winston Foundation for Women's Financial Literacy." I had turned the very house where my trauma was born into a sanctuary designed to prevent it from happening to anyone else. My foundation offered free, comprehensive financial education to women escaping toxic family dynamics and abusive marriages. We taught them how to read complex contracts, how to secure independent bank accounts, and how to spot the exact types of financial manipulation my father had weaponized against me. I was giving them the exact safety net my grandfather had given me. As the contractors tightened the final bolts on the sign, my phone vibrated in the pocket of my blazer. I pulled it out and glanced at the bright screen. It was a single text message from Derek. Seed Round closed the message read, "Thank you for believing in me." I smiled, a genuine, profound expression of absolute peace. I did not text him back immediately. I simply locked the screen and slid the phone back into my pocket. I looked up at the gleaming steel sign one last time, turned my back on the heavy front doors, and stepped forward into my bright, unburdened future. True power and security do not come from family inheritance or external validation, but from absolute self-reliance, financial independence, and the courage to set unbreakable boundaries. Paige's journey demonstrates that enduring toxic family dynamics only drains your potential and feeds their control. By secretly building her expertise and securing her own assets, she effectively stripped her abusers of their only leverage. The ultimate revenge is never just about dismantling those who harmed you. It is about repurposing that trauma into a foundation for your own success and empowering others. Take control of your financial independence today. Build your own unshakable safety net, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below.